The eviction notice trembled in Ethan's hands as Victoria's heels clicked away from his crumbling life. 24 hours ago, she'd whispered promises in his ear. Now she was laughing in a penthouse with another man while he counted quarters for his daughter's dinner. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she celebrated escaping the loser she'd outgrown, was that one phone call would turn her entire world upside down. The broke construction worker she'd thrown away like garbage was about to inherit an empire. And her company? He owned the building, every single floor. If you want to see how far karma can fall, stay until the end. Drop a like, comment what city you're watching from, and let's see how far this story travels. The radiator hadn't worked in 3 weeks. Ethan Cole pressed his palm against the cold metal, then pulled his hand back and shoved it into his jacket pocket. The apartment temperature hovered somewhere around 45 degrees, cold enough that he could see his breath when he spoke, cold enough that his 6-year-old daughter Maya wore 2 sweaters to bed every night. "Daddy, I'm hungry." Maya sat cross-legged on the threadbare couch, her small fingers clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that Ethan had attempted that morning before his job interview. The 5th interview this month. The 5th rejection. "I know, sweetheart." Ethan crouched down in front of her, forcing his face into something resembling a smile. "Give me 10 minutes, okay? I'm going to make us something good." "Like what?" "Like surprise pasta." "We had surprise pasta yesterday." "Yeah, but today's surprise is different." Maya's expression suggested she wasn't buying it, but she nodded anyway. That killed him more than anything, the way she'd learned not to push, not to ask for too much, not to complain. 6 years old, and already she understood they were barely hanging on. Ethan stood and walked the 8 steps it took to cross their studio apartment to what passed for a kitchen. A hot plate, a microwave that only worked when it felt like it, and a mini fridge that hummed like it was angry about still functioning. He opened the cabinet above the sink and counted what they had left. 1 box of pasta, half a jar of sauce, a can of tuna. On the counter, next to the stack of unpaid bills he'd been avoiding, sat a small pile of coins. He'd counted them twice already today. $7.33. Not enough for rent, not enough for the electric bill, barely enough for groceries to get them through the next 2 days. His phone buzzed. Ethan pulled it out, saw Victoria's name on the screen, and felt his stomach clench. "We need to talk. I'm coming over." "No, how are you?" "No, is Maya okay?" Just a demand delivered like she was scheduling a business meeting, which, Ethan supposed, was exactly what this was. Victoria Langford didn't make social calls anymore. Not since she'd been promoted to vice president of operations at Meridian Capital Group. Not since she'd started dressing in $1,000 suits and attending galas with people who owned vacation homes in the Hamptons. Not since she'd started looking at Ethan like he was something that had gotten stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoes. He didn't respond to the text. What was he supposed to say? "Sure, come see how the other half lives? Bring your rich friends, they'll get a kick out of the guy who can't afford heat?" 20 minutes later, her knock rattled the cheap door in its frame. Ethan opened it to find Victoria standing in the dimly lit hallway, dressed in a charcoal gray coat that probably cost more than 3 months of his old salary. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her makeup perfect, her expression carefully neutral in that way she'd mastered at corporate training seminars. Behind her stood a man Ethan didn't recognize, tall, mid-40s, wearing a suit that screamed money and a watch that screamed more money. "This won't take long," Victoria said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The stranger followed her in, his eyes scanning the apartment with barely concealed disgust. Maya looked up from the couch, clutching her rabbit tighter. "Hi, Victoria," Maya said quietly. Victoria's smile was mechanical. "Hi, sweetie." No warmth, no affection, just the bare minimum required to avoid looking like a complete monster in front of a witness. Ethan closed the door. "What's this about?" Victoria set her purse on the counter, right on top of his pile of coins, and pulled out a manila folder. "I'm going to make this simple because I have a dinner reservation at 8. "How considerate." She ignored the sarcasm. "This isn't working, Ethan. You know it. I know it. And frankly, it hasn't been working for a long time." The man behind her shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable but staying silent. Ethan wondered if this was Victoria's boss, her mentor, or just the latest asshole she'd decided to impress. "What isn't working?" Ethan asked, even though he knew. He'd known for months, watching her pull away piece by piece, watching her stop answering his calls, watching her flinch when he touched her like she was afraid poverty might be contagious. "Us," Victoria gestured vaguely between them. "This. You're a good person, Ethan, but you're stuck. You lost your job, you haven't found anything stable, and I can't keep—" "Can't keep what? Pretending you care?" Her jaw tightened. "I've been supporting you financially for 6 months. You gave me $200 once after I asked 4 times. Because you're supposed to be a man who handles his own problems." Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "But instead you're here, living in this—" She waved her hand around the apartment. "This disaster, counting change like some kind of charity case." Maya made a small sound from the couch. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Keep your voice down," he said quietly. "Why? You think she doesn't already know?" Victoria's mask was slipping now, showing the contempt she'd been hiding behind corporate politeness. "You think she doesn't understand that her father is a failure?" The man behind her touched her shoulder. "Victoria, maybe we should—" "No." She shrugged him off, her eyes locked on Ethan. "He needs to hear this. I've wasted 2 years trying to help you build something, trying to push you to be better, to want more. But you're content with nothing. You're content being small. I'm content taking care of my daughter. By feeding her pasta from a dollar store and keeping her in an apartment that's barely better than being homeless?" Victoria's laugh was harsh. "That's not taking care of her, Ethan. That's just slow-motion failure." Ethan's vision tunneled. His pulse hammered in his ears. Somewhere distant, he heard Maya crying softly, but his feet wouldn't move, his voice wouldn't work. Victoria opened the manila folder and pulled out papers. "These are eviction proceedings. Your landlord filed them last week. You have 10 days to vacate." She set them on the counter next to his $7.33. "I'm done, Ethan. We're done. I can't tie my life to someone who's drowning when I've worked this hard to build something real." "Something real," Ethan repeated. The words felt like gravel in his throat. "Like what? Like him?" He nodded toward the stranger, who had the decency to look away. Victoria didn't flinch. "His name is Preston Hale. He's the CEO of Hartman Enterprises. And yes, we've been seeing each other for the past 2 months. He's successful, ambitious, and he understands what it takes to build a future that matters. While I was trying to find work to feed our daughter, you were—" "Maya isn't my daughter." Victoria's voice went ice cold. "She's yours. From your marriage to Sarah. I tried to be there for both of you after Sarah died, I really did. But I can't sacrifice my entire life because you refused to move forward." Ethan felt something break inside his chest, not his heart. That had been cracking for months. This was something deeper, something structural. The last belief he'd held on to, that people were fundamentally decent, that love meant something, that loyalty existed outside of fairy tales. "Get out," he whispered. "Gladly." Victoria picked up her purse. "Preston's attorney will handle the logistics if you need help with housing resources. I've already moved my things from your storage unit." "I don't have a storage unit." "You did. I paid for it. Now you don't." She walked to the door, Preston following like an obedient shadow. Before leaving, Victoria turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, I did care about you once. But caring doesn't pay bills, Ethan. Caring doesn't build a life. You taught me that." The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a coffin ceiling. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the apartment, staring at the eviction papers on the counter. Outside, a siren wailed past. The fridge hummed its angry song. Maya's quiet crying mixed with both sounds, creating a symphony of everything falling apart. "Daddy?" He turned. Maya had come off the couch, still holding her rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "Are we going to be okay?" Ethan crossed the room and dropped to his knees, pulling his daughter into a hug so tight, she squeaked. Her small body trembled against his chest, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "Yeah, baby," he whispered into her hair. "We're going to be okay." It was the biggest lie he'd ever told. 6. 2 hours later, Ethan sat on a bench outside a 24-hour laundromat on West Division Street, 3 garbage bags of their belongings piled at his feet. Maya slept against his shoulder, wrapped in every jacket they owned, her rabbit tucked under her chin. He tried calling his cousin in Milwaukee. No answer. He tried calling his old foreman from the construction company. Voicemail. He'd tried calling the one friend from high school who'd told him, "If you ever need anything, man." Disconnected number. The temperature had dropped to 23 degrees. Ethan's breath came out in thick clouds. His fingers were numb even inside his gloves. Maya shivered in her sleep and he pulled her closer, using his body heat to keep her warm. A woman walking her dog passed by, glanced at them, and hurried away faster. Ethan understood. They looked like what they were, homeless, desperate, the kind of problem you pretend not to see because seeing it means confronting how quickly everything can fall apart. He thought about Sarah, his wife, Maya's mom. Gone 3 years now from a brain aneurysm that struck so fast the doctor said she probably didn't feel pain. Just there one moment, gone the next, leaving him alone with a 3-year-old in grief so heavy it had nearly crushed him. He'd survived that. He'd kept working, kept moving, kept being a father because Maya needed him to be one. But this? Sitting on a frozen bench at midnight with nowhere to go and $7 to his name while his daughter shivered in his arms. This felt like the universe finally finishing what it started. His phone buzzed. Ethan almost didn't check it. What was the point? But Maya shifted in her sleep, and the movement made him reach into his pocket out of habit. Unknown number. International code. He stared at it for a long moment, then answered because what did he have to lose? Hello? Am I speaking with Ethan James Cole? The voice was male, British, formal in a way that suggested expensive education and even more expensive suits. Yeah, who's this? My name is Oliver Pembroke. I'm an attorney with Pembroke & Associates calling from London. I apologize for the late hour, Mr. Cole, but this matter is quite urgent. Ethan's first thought was debt collectors had gotten creative. His second thought was scam. His third thought was he was too tired for this. Look, if this is about money, I owe... Quite the opposite, actually. Papers rustled on the other end of the line. Mr. Cole, I'm calling regarding the estate of your grandfather, Jonathan Edward Cole. Ethan's brain stuttered. My grandfather? Yes, I understand you may not have had contact with him, but I didn't have any contact with him. My dad left when I was 2. I don't know anything about his family. I see. More papers rustling. Well, Mr. Cole, your grandfather passed away 6 days ago at his home in Monaco. He was 87. And according to his last will and testament, which was updated 3 months ago, you are named as his sole beneficiary. The words didn't make sense. Ethan heard them, but they arrived in his brain scrambled, like a puzzle dumped out of its box. Sole beneficiary of what? His estate, which includes property holdings, investment portfolios, and business interests across Europe and North America. The total estimated value is approximately $1.3 billion. The laundromat's neon sign buzzed above Ethan's head. A car drove past, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Maya mumbled something in her sleep about rabbits. This is a scam, Ethan said. I assure you it's not. I have documentation I can provide, including your grandfather's death certificate, the will, and verification of assets. I can also arrange a video conference with my firm's senior partners if you'd like additional confirmation. Why would someone I've never met leave me anything? Oliver Pembroke's voice softened slightly. According to the personal letter he left with his will, your grandfather spent the last 15 years of his life trying to locate you. He hired investigators, traced records, searched for any connection to his son, your father. When he finally found you 2 years ago, he chose to observe from a distance rather than disrupt your life. The letter indicates he was aware of your recent difficulties and wanted to ensure you and your daughter would be provided for. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. He was watching me? In a manner of speaking, he received reports on your well-being. Nothing invasive, just confirmation that you existed and where you were living. I believe he hoped to reach out personally, but his health declined rapidly. This is insane. I understand this is overwhelming, Mr. Cole, but I need you to understand the urgency of the situation. There are significant legal and financial matters that require your immediate attention. Assets that need to be secured, accounts that need to be transferred, properties that need management oversight. Ethan looked down at Maya sleeping against him, then at the garbage bags containing everything they owned. What do I need to do? First, I need you to verify your identity. Then I'll need you to come to our Chicago office. Yes, we have a satellite office there specifically for handling North American assets. We'll begin the process of transferring legal ownership and setting up your access to accounts. This can begin as early as tomorrow morning if you're available. Tomorrow morning, Ethan trailed off. Tomorrow morning, he was going to be sitting on this bench or in this laundromat, trying to figure out where to shower and how to keep Maya fed. Yeah, I'm available. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you the address and appointment details. In the meantime, I'm arranging temporary accommodations for you at the Peninsula Hotel. A car will collect you within the hour. A car? Yes. And Mr. Cole? I know this seems surreal, but I promise you, by tomorrow afternoon, your life will be very different. The call ended. Ethan sat there staring at his phone's dark screen, certain he'd hallucinated the entire conversation. The cold had probably given him brain damage, or he'd fallen asleep and this was a dream brought on by stress and desperation. But 45 minutes later, a black Bentley pulled up to the curb in front of the laundromat, and a driver in a crisp uniform stepped out. Mr. Cole? Ethan nodded slowly, unable to speak. I'm here to take you to the Peninsula. May I help with your bags? The driver reached for one of the garbage bags without a trace of judgment in his expression. Professional, courteous, like this was completely normal. Ethan looked down at Maya, still sleeping, still shivering despite being wrapped in layers. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, okay. He gathered his daughter in his arms and stood on numb legs. The driver opened the back door of the Bentley, and warm air rolled out like a luxury Ethan had forgotten existed. As they pulled away from the curb, Ethan looked back at the laundromat, at the bench where 5 minutes ago he'd been contemplating which homeless shelter might have space. Inside the car, Maya stirred and opened her eyes. Daddy? Where are we? We're going somewhere warm, sweetheart. For real? Yeah, for real. She smiled and closed her eyes again, trusting him completely, believing in him the way only children can believe in their parents. Ethan pressed his forehead against the window and watched Chicago's streets blur past. Somewhere in this city, Victoria was probably having dinner with Preston, laughing about the pathetic ex she'd finally escaped, celebrating her freedom from the loser who couldn't get his life together. She had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt something other than desperation. He felt the beginning of something that tasted like justice. Parag. The Peninsula Hotel sat on East Superior Street like a monument to wealth Ethan had only seen in movies. The driver pulled up to the entrance where a doorman waited, and suddenly Ethan was being ushered through a lobby that smelled like expensive flowers and old money. His garbage bags looked obscene against the marble floors. Mr. Cole, welcome. A woman in an immaculate suit appeared beside him. I'm Rachel Torres, the night manager. Mr. Pembroke's office has arranged the ambassador suite for you and your daughter. If you'll follow me? Ethan followed because he didn't know what else to do. Maya clung to his neck, half asleep, as they rode an elevator that moved so smoothly it felt like floating. The suite door opened onto a space larger than every apartment Ethan had lived in for the past 5 years combined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline. A separate bedroom with a bed so large it looked like it could sleep 6 people. A bathroom with marble countertops and a tub that could double as a swimming pool. The kitchen is fully stocked, Rachel was saying, gesturing to a room Ethan could barely process. If you need anything at all, just dial 0 on any phone. Room service operates 24 hours. Housekeeping will come at your convenience. Is there anything you need immediately? Ethan looked down at Maya, who had lifted her head and was staring at everything with wide eyes. Food, he managed. Something warm. For her. Of course. I'll have our chef prepare a selection. Any dietary restrictions? No, just anything. Thank you. Rachel smiled warmly and left. Ethan set Maya down on the couch, a couch that probably cost more than a used car, and she immediately bounced slightly, testing it. Daddy, it's so soft. I know. Are we really staying here? Yeah, baby. At least for tonight. Is this because of Grandpa? Ethan froze. What? The man on the phone said something about a grandpa. I was kind of awake. Yeah, we got really lucky, Maya. She considered this, then nodded seriously. We deserved luck. We've been really good. God, if only the universe worked that way. 20 minutes later, room service arrived with grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, fresh fruit, and chocolate chip cookies. Maya ate like she was afraid the food might disappear, and Ethan couldn't blame her because he felt the same way. After she'd eaten, he ran her a bath in the enormous tub. She played with the soap bottles and laughed at the bubbles, and Ethan sat on the closed toilet lid watching her, trying to make sense of the last 3 hours. 1 billion dollars. The number was so big it didn't feel real. It felt like a typo, like someone had added too many zeros by mistake. But the hotel was real. The food was real. The car had been real. Which meant tomorrow morning, when he met with Oliver Pembroke's office, that would be real too. After Maya fell asleep in the massive bed, she looked so small in the middle of it, Ethan stood by the window and looked out at Chicago. The city glittered below him, all lights and movement and life continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Oliver Pembroke's assistant. Your appointment is confirmed for 9 a.m. at 3:30. North Wabash Avenue, Suite 4200. A car will collect you at 8:30 a.m. Documents attached for your review." Ethan opened the attachments with shaking hands. The first was a letter, written in careful cursive on heavy paper that had been photographed and sent as an image. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you've been notified of your inheritance. I wish we could have met in person. I wish I could have known you as more than words in investigator reports. But I spent too many years being proud and angry at your father for leaving, and by the time I realized family mattered more than old grudges, I was too sick to travel and too cowardly to reach out. I know you've struggled. I know you've faced difficulties that no person should face alone, especially while raising a child. I watched from a distance and felt helpless, wanting to intervene but respecting your independence. What I'm giving you isn't charity. It's what should have been your father's, and through him, yours. Build something with it. Give your daughter the life she deserves. And if you can, forgive an old man for not being brave enough to be your grandfather while he still could. With love and regret, Jonathan Cole." Ethan read it 3 times, his throat tight. The second attachment was a summary of assets. Real estate holdings in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Monaco. Commercial properties, residential developments, a portfolio of stocks and bonds, bank accounts in 6 different countries. And there, buried in the middle of the list, one item made Ethan's heart stop. Meridian Tower, Chicago, Illinois. 52-story Class A office building, Central Business District. Current primary tenant, Meridian Capital Group, floors 30 to 45. Lease renewal pending, Meridian Capital Group, Victoria's company. The company where she was vice president. The company she'd sacrificed their relationship for. The company whose success she'd chosen over everything else. He owned the building where she worked. Ethan started laughing. Quiet at first, then harder, until tears ran down his face and he had to sit down on the floor because his legs wouldn't hold him. Somewhere in this city, Victoria was sleeping next to Preston, probably in his expensive condo, probably on expensive sheets, probably dreaming about her expensive future. She had no idea that the broken man she'd thrown away now controlled her company's entire physical existence. The laughter died slowly, replaced by something colder and more focused. Ethan looked at his phone and scrolled back through his message history with Victoria. The last text she'd sent before coming to his apartment today sat there like a monument to her cruelty. "We need to talk. I'm coming over." No warmth. No kindness. Just a demand. He typed a response now at 2:47 in the morning, sitting on the floor of a luxury hotel suite while his daughter slept in safety for the first time in months. "Thanks for the conversation earlier. Really clarified some things for me." He deleted it without sending. Not yet. First, he needed to understand exactly what he owned, what power he had, and how thoroughly he could dismantle the pedestal Victoria had built for herself. Tomorrow morning would be the beginning. Tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan fell asleep in warmth and silence, his daughter safe beside him, and dreamed of nothing at all. The morning came too fast and too bright. Ethan woke to Maya jumping on the bed, announcing she'd found 3 different kinds of orange juice in the fridge and did he want to try all of them? "Maybe just one, baby." But they're fancy. He couldn't argue with that logic. By 8:15, they were both dressed. Maya in the same clothes from yesterday, Ethan in his least wrinkled shirt, and waiting in the lobby. The same driver from last night appeared, and they rode in comfortable silence to an office building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate people. Suite 4200 was all glass and steel, with the name Pembroke and Associates etched on a bronze plaque by the door. A receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine smiled at them. "Mr. Cole? They're ready for you in the main conference room. Can I get your daughter anything? We have a children's area with books and activities." Maya looked up at Ethan, uncertain. "It's okay," he told her. "I'll be right in there. You can see me through the glass." She nodded and let the receptionist lead her to a corner space filled with toys that probably cost more than Ethan's last paycheck. Oliver Pembroke turned out to be exactly what Ethan had pictured. Mid-60s, impeccably dressed, British accent that suggested boarding schools and Oxford. He shook Ethan's hand with surprising warmth. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, sit." The conference room held 6 other people, attorneys, financial advisors, and one woman who introduced herself as the estate executor. They spent the next 2 hours walking Ethan through documents that made his head spin. Asset transfers, tax implications, property management structures, investment portfolio reviews. Every few minutes, someone would say something like, "This property generates approximately $4.2 million annually in rental income," or "The London portfolio alone is valued at $280 million," and Ethan would nod like he understood while internally screaming. Finally, Oliver Pembroke slid a single piece of paper across the table. "This is the simplified version, Mr. Cole. The exact total of your inheritance, after all debts, estate taxes, and transfer fees, is $1.27 billion. The assets are divided across real estate, investment accounts, and business holdings. You have full legal ownership as of this morning." Ethan stared at the number. $1,270 million. "There is one pressing matter," one of the other attorneys said. She was younger, sharper, with eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "Meridian Tower in Chicago. The primary tenant's lease expires in 45 days, and they've been negotiating renewal terms for the past 6 months." "Meridian Capital Group," Ethan said quietly. "Yes. They occupy 15 floors and represent approximately 60% of the building's rental income. Losing them would be significant." "What are they asking for?" "A 20-year lease extension with a rent reduction of 12% plus building improvements they want the landlord to fund. Approximately $8.5 million in concessions." Ethan sat back in his chair. "And what was my grandfather planning to do?" "He was preparing to reject their terms and find new tenants. The market is strong enough that we could fill the space within 18 months, though there would be short-term revenue loss. What happens if I reject their terms now?" Oliver Pembroke exchanged glances with the other attorneys. "They'd be forced to either accept our counteroffer or vacate at lease end. Given the current market and the cost of relocating 15 floors of operations, they'd likely negotiate. And if they can't reach acceptable terms, they leave. We release the space." Ethan thought about Victoria in her expensive coat, telling him he was small, telling him he was dragging her down, telling him Maya wasn't her problem. "I want to handle this negotiation personally," he said. The room went quiet. "Mr. Cole," Oliver began carefully, "these negotiations are typically handled by our commercial real estate division. They have expertise in a sum. I want to handle it personally," Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "Set up a meeting. Tell them the new owner wants to discuss terms face-to-face before making any decisions." The sharp-eyed attorney leaned forward. "May I ask why?" "Personal interest in the Chicago market." It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Oliver Pembroke studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll arrange it. These meetings typically happen at the property itself or at the tenant's headquarters. Do you have a preference?" Ethan thought about Victoria walking into a conference room, expecting to negotiate with some corporate representative, and finding him instead. "Make it formal," he said. "Their headquarters. And I want it in their main conference room with their full leadership team present. Tell them the new owner is considering multiple options and wants to understand their business before committing to a 20-year relationship. The sharp attorney smiled slightly. That's actually a very sound business strategy, Mr. Cole. When can we make this happen? I'll reach out to their team today, likely within the week. Good. The meeting continued for another hour, covering banking access, security protocols, and the team of people who would be managing various aspects of the estate until Ethan got his bearings. Finally, Oliver Pembroke stood and extended his hand again. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Cole. I know it's overwhelming, but you have an excellent team supporting you. Don't hesitate to reach out with questions, no matter how small they seem. Ethan shook his hand, then gathered Maya from the children's area where she'd built an elaborate castle from magnetic blocks. How'd it go? She asked. Good, baby. Really good. Are we still rich? Yeah, we're still rich. Can we get new socks? Mine have holes. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. We can get whatever you want. They spent the afternoon at a department store where Ethan bought Maya an entire new wardrobe, plus toys, plus books, plus the fancy art supplies she'd been staring at. The total came to just over $2,000, and when he handed over the black credit card Oliver Pembroke's office had given him, it went through without a hiccup. Maya carried her bags like they contained treasure, chattering about which stuffed animal she'd sleep with first and whether her new shoes made her run faster. Ethan watched her and felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. This was what it was supposed to be like. This was what Victoria had denied them because his bank account wasn't impressive enough. That night, back at the peninsula, Maya fell asleep clutching a new rabbit, this one pristine and soft, unlike her old worn-out one, and Ethan sat by the window again, looking out at the city. His phone buzzed. A text from Oliver Pembroke's assistant. Meeting confirmed with Meridian Capital Group leadership. Thursday, 2 p.m. Their headquarters. Full executive team will be present. Thursday was 3 days away. Ethan opened his message thread with Victoria one more time and stared at it, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Still, he didn't write anything. Words weren't enough for what was coming. He needed to see her face when she realized exactly what she'd walked away from. The 3 days before Thursday felt like living in someone else's life. Ethan moved through moments that didn't seem real. Signing documents that transferred millions of dollars. Meeting with financial advisors who treated him like he'd always been wealthy. Taking Maya to restaurants where the children's menu cost more than he used to spend on groceries for a week. Every morning he woke up expecting to find himself back on that bench outside the laundromat. But every morning the peninsula's soft sheets and Maya's happy chatter reminded him this was actually happening. On Wednesday afternoon, Oliver Pembroke's assistant called about logistics. Mr. Cole, I wanted to confirm details for tomorrow's meeting. The car will collect you at 1:15. Meridian Capital's headquarters is a 12-minute drive, accounting for traffic. You'll be meeting with their CEO, CFO, VP of Operations, and their lead legal counsel. VP of Operations, Ethan repeated. That's Victoria Langford. A pause. Yes, sir. Is that a problem? No, just confirming who'll be there. Understood. Our team prepared a briefing document on their financial position and negotiation history. I'm sending it now. Mr. Pembroke also wanted me to remind you that you're under no obligation to make any decisions during the meeting. This is purely exploratory. After the call ended, Ethan opened the briefing document and forced himself to read it, despite his brain's resistance to corporate jargon. The summary was clear enough. Meridian Capital Group was doing well financially, but had overextended on recent acquisitions. They needed the lease renewal at reduced rates to maintain their profit margins. Losing their headquarters would cost them significantly more than accepting a higher rent. In other words, they were negotiating from weakness but pretending otherwise. The document included photos of their executive team. There was Victoria, professionally shot with perfect lighting, her blonde hair styled, her expression confident. The caption read, Victoria Langford, VP of Operations, 3 years with MCG, previously Senior Director at Hartman Enterprises. Hartman Enterprises. Preston's company. So she'd worked there before, probably met him there, probably started whatever they had while still with Ethan. The timeline made him feel sick. He closed the document and found Maya in the suite's living room, coloring at the coffee table with her new markers. Hey, sweetheart, I have a work meeting tomorrow afternoon. It might take a few hours. She looked up. Will I come? No, you'll stay here with Sarah. That was the hotel's childcare coordinator, a kind woman in her 50s who Maya had taken to immediately. She said something about teaching you to make cookies. Real cookies? Very real cookies. Maya considered this, then nodded. Okay, but you have to try one when you get back. Deal. That night, Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at himself in a way he hadn't in months. The beard he'd grown because razors cost money, the lines around his eyes that seemed deeper than they should be at 32, the way his shoulders curved forward slightly, like he'd spent too long carrying weight he couldn't put down. He looked tired. He looked beaten. He looked exactly like what Victoria had called him, a failure. The next morning he called the hotel concierge. Mr. Cole, how can I help you? I need a haircut and a shave, and I need to buy a suit, a good one. Can you arrange that? 2 hours later, a barber arrived at the suite with a full kit of equipment. The haircut took 40 minutes. The barber working with quiet precision, while Ethan sat still and tried not to think about the last time he'd paid for anything like this. The shave was straight razor, the kind his grandfather probably got every morning, the kind that felt like ceremony rather than chore. When the barber finished and held up a mirror, Ethan barely recognized himself. The exhausted construction worker was gone. In his place was someone who looked alert, clean, sharp. Someone who might actually own buildings. Better? The barber asked. Yeah, much better. The suit came next, delivered by a private tailor from a men's store Ethan had never heard of. The man measured him efficiently, made notes on a tablet, then disappeared and returned 90 minutes later with 3 options: charcoal gray, navy blue, and black. Ethan chose the charcoal gray because it reminded him of Victoria's coat the night she'd brought the eviction papers. Petty, maybe, but he was past caring about being the bigger person. The suit fit perfectly. The tailor had somehow constructed it to make Ethan's shoulders look broader, his posture straighter, his entire presence more substantial. With the white shirt and dark tie, the man suggested, Ethan looked like he belonged in conference rooms and corner offices. He looked like money. Maya appeared in the doorway and gasped. Daddy, you look like a prince. Not quite, baby. Yes, you do. You look so fancy. The tailor smiled. Your daughter has excellent taste, Mr. Cole. At 1:15 exactly, Ethan kissed Maya goodbye and rode the elevator down to the lobby where the Bentley waited. The driver opened the door without comment, and they pulled into Chicago traffic that parted around them like the car was immune to normal rules. Meridian Capital Group's headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a building 3 blocks from Ethan's old apartment. He'd walked past it 100 times when he'd been job hunting, never imagining he'd be inside it, never mind owning the property it sat on. The lobby was all marble and glass, with the MCG logo prominent on one wall. A receptionist directed him to the executive elevators, and he rode to the 42nd floor in silence, watching the numbers climb. His reflection in those polished elevator doors showed a stranger, composed, professional, dangerous. The doors opened onto a waiting area where a young woman in a sleek dress greeted him. Mr. Cole? I'm Jennifer, Mr. Whitmore's executive assistant. Thank you so much for coming. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, thank you. Wonderful. They're just finishing up their previous meeting. It should only be a few more minutes. Ethan sat in a chair that probably cost $1,000 and looked around at the corporate art on the walls, the strategic placement of business magazines on the side table, the subtle flecks of success in every design choice. This was Victoria's world now. This was what she'd chosen over him. A door opened and 4 people filed out, all suits and confident handshakes. Then Jennifer stood and smiled. They're ready for you, Mr. Cole. She led him down a short hallway to a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. 4 people waited inside, standing as he entered. The CEO, Richard Whitmore, stepped forward first. Late 50s, silver hair, practiced smile. Mr. Cole, Richard Whitmore, but thank you so much for making time to meet with us. Of course. This is Marcus Chen, our CFO. A man in his 40s nodded. David Brewster, our chief legal counsel. Another nod, this one from a sharp-looking guy who immediately reminded Ethan of the attorneys in Pembroke's office. And Victoria Langford, our VP of operations. Victoria stood at the far end of the table, and for one perfect moment, her professional mask completely cracked. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. She'd been preparing to meet a property owner, probably some corporate representative or investment fund manager. Instead, she was looking at the man she'd thrown away 4 days ago, the man she'd told was a failure, the man she'd left counting coins in a freezing apartment. Except he didn't look like that man anymore. Ethan held her stare for exactly 3 seconds, then turned his attention back to Richard, as though she was the least interesting person in the room. "Shall we sit?" Richard gestured to the table. They arranged themselves with Richard at the head, Marcus and David on one side, Victoria on the other. Ethan took the chair opposite Richard, establishing himself as an equal rather than a supplicant. Victoria still hadn't spoken. She'd recovered enough to close her mouth and attempt a neutral expression, but her hands were gripping the edge of the table, and Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. "So," Richard began, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed pitch, "we're absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to discuss our continued partnership. Meridian Capital has been a tenant in your building for 8 years, and we've always maintained an excellent relationship with property management. Our lease renewal represents significant long-term value and stability for a—" "I've reviewed your proposal," Ethan interrupted quietly. 20-year extension, 12% rent reduction, $8.5 million in building improvements that you want me to fund." Richard's smile tightened slightly at being cut off. "Well, yes, those are the broad strokes. Obviously, we're open to discussion on specific terms, but given the length of the commitment we're offering and the value we bring as a stable, prestigious tenant—" "Help me understand something," Ethan said, his eyes moving to Victoria. "You're asking for a rent reduction, while your company's revenue increased 18% last year. Your profit margins are healthy. Your executive compensation went up across the board. So why exactly should I subsidize your operations?" The room went very quiet. Marcus jumped in, his CFO instincts kicking in. "Mr. Cole, while our top-line revenue has grown, we've also made significant strategic investments that position us for— You acquired 2 smaller firms for a combined $340 million, partially financed through debt that's now straining your cash flow." Ethan kept his voice level, almost friendly. "Which is fine, that's business. But it's your strategic choice, not my problem. You're asking me to accept less money so you can maintain margins that you've compressed through your own acquisition strategy." David the lawyer leaned forward. "With respect, Mr. Cole, the commercial real estate market is highly competitive. If our terms aren't acceptable, we have options. Several buildings in the area would be very interested in a tenant of our caliber, and—" "Then why haven't you moved already?" Ethan asked. "You've been negotiating this renewal for 6 months. If you had better options, you'd have taken them. The reality is that relocating 15 floors of operations would cost you somewhere between $12 and $15 million, plus business disruption, plus the risk of losing key staff who don't want longer commutes. So, you're here trying to get me to accept less money by threatening to do something that would cost you significantly more money." No one spoke for a long moment. Victoria found her voice, though it came out tighter than usual. "Mr. Cole, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here. We're not trying to—" "Do we know each other?" Ethan asked, looking directly at her with polite confusion. Her face went through several expressions at once. I don't think we've been introduced," Ethan continued smoothly. "You're Victoria Langford, VP of Operations. Have we met before?" He was giving her an out, a chance to pretend they were strangers, to maintain her professional dignity, to save face in front of her colleagues. She should have taken it. Instead, something in her snapped. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm sorry? You're sitting here pretending you don't know me? After everything—" She cut herself off, but the damage was done. Richard looked between them, his expression confused and increasingly concerned. "Victoria, do you two have a prior relationship?" "No," Ethan said at the exact moment Victoria said yes. The contradiction hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's jaw clenched. "We were involved, personally, until recently." "I see." Richard's tone had gone very careful. "And Mr. Cole, you didn't think this was relevant to disclose before this meeting?" "I ended a relationship with someone 4 days ago," Ethan said calmly. "I didn't realize at the time that she worked here. When I reviewed the materials my legal team prepared and saw her name, I considered rescheduling, but I decided that personal history shouldn't interfere with business decisions. I assumed we could both be professional. It was masterful. He'd made himself the reasonable one, the mature one, the one trying to keep personal matters separate while implying Victoria was the one bringing emotion into business. Victoria looked like she wanted to throw something. You assumed? You're unbelievable. Ms. Langford, David the lawyer said sharply, a warning in his tone. But Victoria was past listening. She turned to Richard. 4 days ago he was living in a... She stopped herself, breathing hard. I'm sorry. This is inappropriate. But you need to understand that there's a significant conflict of interest here. What kind of conflict? Richard asked. Personal history that would make objective negotiation difficult. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for this situation. My legal team did advise me that having prior knowledge of one of your executives might complicate matters, but since I'm the property owner, there's no avoiding the conflict. The question is whether we can proceed professionally or whether you'd prefer to reschedule with my attorneys handling negotiations directly. It was a trap disguised as courtesy. If Richard said they couldn't proceed professionally, he'd be admitting his VP couldn't control herself. If he said they could proceed, he'd have to manage Victoria while Ethan maintained the high ground. We can proceed, Richard said, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable. Victoria, perhaps you should step out for this portion of the discussion. No, Victoria said. I'm the operations VP. These lease terms directly affect my department. I need to be here. Then I need you to maintain professional boundaries. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she nodded. Of course. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Richard and Marcus did most of the talking now, walking through their proposal with increasing desperation as Ethan calmly dismantled each argument. David tried several legal angles about market rates and comparable properties, but Ethan had clearly been briefed well by Pembroke's team. Victoria sat silent, her face pale, occasionally glancing at Ethan like she couldn't quite believe he was real. Finally, after 45 minutes of circular discussion, Richard played what he clearly thought was his strongest card. Mr. Cole, I'm going to be frank with you. Meridian Capital Group is a prestigious tenant. We bring credibility and stability to any building we occupy. Our presence attracts other high-quality tenants. Losing us would damage the property's reputation in the market. Possibly, Ethan agreed, or it might signal that the property has standards and doesn't accept unfavorable terms just to maintain occupancy. There are plenty of growing firms that would love 15 floors in a prime location at market rate. Finding tenants to fill that much space could take years. My team estimates 18 months maximum, and in the meantime, I own the building outright with no mortgage, so I can afford the vacancy. That landed hard. Richard's expression flickered. He clearly hadn't known the property was owned free and clear. Marcus tried a different approach. What if we agreed to a smaller rent reduction, say 6% instead of 12%? What if you agreed to a rent increase? Ethan countered. Market rates in this area have risen 11% over the term of your current lease. You've been locked in at below market rates for 3 years. A true market rate renewal would actually be a 22% increase. That's not realistic. Neither is a reduction when you don't have leverage. The room fell into tense silence. Finally, Victoria spoke. You're doing this because of us. Because of what happened. Everyone turned to look at her. Victoria, Richard started. No, let's just say it out loud, she continued, her voice rising. You're punishing my company because I ended our relationship. This isn't about business terms. This is personal revenge. Ethan met her eyes. You think you're important enough to influence how I manage a billion-dollar real estate portfolio? The words hit like a slap. Victoria actually flinched. I'm making business decisions based on financial analysis, Ethan continued. Your company wants favorable terms you haven't earned and can't justify. That's not personal, that's just math. The fact that you and I used to know each other is completely irrelevant to whether your lease proposal makes financial sense. Used to know each other? Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. We were together for 2 years. I helped you after your wife died. I was there for your daughter, and now you're sitting here acting like I was nothing? You told me I was nothing, Ethan said quietly. You told me I was small. You told me I was dragging you down. You told me my daughter wasn't your problem. So yes, Victoria, we used to know each other, past tense, and now we're having a business meeting where past tense doesn't matter. Richard stood abruptly. I think we need to take a break. Mr. Cole, Would you mind waiting in the lounge? We need to caucus internally. Of course. Ethan stood and walked out without looking back at Victoria, though he could feel her stare burning into his shoulders. Jennifer led him to a smaller waiting room with leather chairs and offered him coffee, which he accepted just to have something to do with his hands. His heart was hammering and his mouth felt dry, but he'd maintained his composure in there, and that felt like a victory in itself. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the conference room door opened and David, the lawyer, stepped out. Mr. Cole, they're ready to resume. Back inside, the atmosphere had changed. Victoria's chair was empty. Ms. Langford felt it was best if she excused herself from the remainder of the meeting, Richard said stiffly, to avoid any further complications. I understand. Mr. Cole, let me be direct with you. We need this building. Our operations are established here, our clients know this address, and relocating would be genuinely difficult. But we also can't agree to terms that don't make financial sense for us. What would it take to reach an agreement today? Ethan considered. He could push harder, demand the full market increase, make them squirm, but Oliver Pembroke's voice echoed in his head. You're building a business reputation, not just settling a personal score. Here's what I'm willing to do, Ethan said. 20-year lease at current rates, no reduction, no increase. You cover your own tenant improvements? In exchange, I'll guarantee no rent increases for the first 5 years, then 3% annually after that, which is below market inflation. Richard and Marcus exchanged glances. That's actually reasonable, Marcus admitted. It's more than reasonable, David added. Most commercial leases include annual escalations from day one. Richard sat back in his chair, studying Ethan. You could have demanded much more. I could have, but I'm not interested in gouging tenants. I'm interested in stable, long-term relationships with quality companies. Your firm is solid. You just overreached on the negotiation. Accept terms that work for both of us, and we can avoid the disruption of you moving and me releasing. Another silence, this one thoughtful rather than tense. We'd need to review the specific language with our board, Richard said slowly. But in principle, yes, I think we can work with that. Good. Have your legal team coordinate with mine. Ethan stood and extended his hand. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. The handshakes were firm, professional. As Ethan turned to leave, Richard spoke again. Mr. Cole, I apologize for the awkwardness earlier. If I'd known about your history with Miss Langford, I would have handled the setup differently. Not your fault, Ethan said. These things happen. He made it to the elevator before his hands started shaking. The ride down felt longer than the ride up. Ethan watched the floor numbers descend and tried to process what had just happened. He'd walked into Victoria's professional world and dismantled her authority in front of her bosses. He'd reduced her to an emotional outburst while maintaining perfect control. He'd proven that the weak, struggling man she'd abandoned was capable of things she'd never imagined. It should have felt better than it did. The Bentley waited at the curb. Ethan climbed in and the driver pulled away without asking where to go. He already knew to return to the peninsula. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Please. V. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. 3 blocks later, another text. I know you're angry. I understand why. But what you did in there was unprofessional and cruel. I don't deserve this. This time he almost laughed. She thought he was being cruel? She thought this was undeserved? A third text arrived before he could decide whether to respond to the second. Your daughter needs stability, not a father focused on revenge. Think about what you're teaching her. That one made his jaw clench. Bringing Maya into it was a low blow, especially coming from the woman who'd explicitly said Maya wasn't her problem. He typed a response. Don't contact me again. Any business communication should go through my attorneys. Her reply came within seconds. So that's it? 2 years together and you can't even have a conversation with me? You're the one who ended the conversation. In my apartment, while my daughter cried. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 3 times before her response finally came. I didn't know you were secretly rich. I didn't know you were going to inherit all of this. You let me think. I let you think nothing. I didn't know either, and it shouldn't matter. You didn't leave me because I was poor. You left me because you thought I was weak. The money didn't change who I am. It just showed you who you are. This time, she didn't respond immediately. Ethan watched the screen, waiting, his pulse still elevated from the confrontation. Finally, "Can we meet somewhere private, please? I just want to explain." "There's nothing to explain. We're done." "That was your decision, made very clearly." "Ethan, please. I made a mistake." He almost threw the phone. Instead, he turned it off completely and shoved it in his pocket. The Bentley pulled up to the peninsula. Ethan rode the elevator to his suite, straightened his tie, fixed his expression, and opened the door to find Maya and Sarah decorating cookies at the dining table. "Daddy!" Maya jumped up, chocolate on her face. "Look what we made!" "Those are beautiful, sweetheart." "Sarah says I'm a natural baker. Try one." He bit into a sugar cookie covered in approximately 3 inches of frosting and made appreciative sounds while Maya beamed. "How was your work meeting?" she asked. "It was fine. Got some things done." "Did you fire anybody? Rich people on TV are always firing people." Sarah laughed. "That's not all they do, sweetie." "I didn't fire anyone," Ethan assured her. "Just talked about boring business stuff." Maya seemed satisfied with that and returned to frosting another cookie with intense concentration. Ethan excused himself to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing his expensive suit, trying to figure out why he felt hollow instead of triumphant. He'd won. He'd faced Victoria on her turf and proven that she'd made a catastrophic mistake. He'd shown her exactly what she'd thrown away. So why did it feel like he'd lost something too? His phone, turned back on despite his better judgment, buzzed again. Not Victoria this time, but Oliver Pembroke. "Mr. Cole, I heard from Meridian's legal team. They're accepting your terms with minor language adjustments. Well done." "Thank you." "There's one other matter. Miss Langford apparently contacted our office directly asking to speak with you. I told her all communication should go through proper channels, but I wanted to make you aware." "She already tried texting me." "I see. Do you want us to send a formal cease and desist?" Ethan thought about that. Thought about Victoria receiving legal papers telling her to stay away from him, the same way she'd handed him eviction papers. "Not yet," he said. "Just keep blocking her if she contacts your office." "Understood." "Also, there's a charity gala Thursday evening, the Chicago Business Foundation annual dinner. Several of your properties are sponsors, so you received an invitation. It's very high profile, major donors, corporate leadership. Might be good for you to attend, start building relationships." "I don't know anything about galas." "You know how to have a conversation. That's enough. And Mr. Cole? Miss Langford will likely be there. Her company buys a table every year." "All the more reason to go," Ethan said before he could think better of it. After the call, he changed out of the suit and spent the evening playing board games with Maya, helping her with a puzzle, reading her 3 different bedtime stories. Normal dad things. Things that had nothing to do with corporate negotiations or ex-girlfriends or sudden wealth. But as he sat in the dark after Maya fell asleep, looking out at Chicago's glittering skyline, he couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's text, about her claim that he was being cruel, that he was focused on revenge, that he should think about what he was teaching his daughter. Was she right? Was this about Maya's stability, or about making Victoria hurt the way she'd hurt him? His phone lit up with one more message. "I loved you. That was real, whatever you think now. And I'm sorry for how I handled things, but this vendetta is going to destroy you more than it hurts me. Let it go." Ethan read it 3 times, then typed a response he'd probably regret. "You don't get to tell me how to handle pain you caused. You wanted me out of your life. I'm out. But I'm not going to pretend the last 4 days didn't happen, and I'm not going to make business decisions based on protecting your feelings. You'll see me around, Victoria. You'll see me at events and meetings and places where our professional worlds overlap. And every time you do, you're going to remember that you had a choice and you chose wrong. That's not revenge. That's just consequences." He sent it before he could reconsider, then finally, permanently, blocked her number. In the morning, he'd start planning for the gala, figuring out how to navigate a world he'd never been part of. But tonight he sat in the dark and let himself feel everything he'd been pushing down. Anger, satisfaction, grief, confusion, all of it mixing together into something he couldn't name. Maya was safe. That was what mattered. Maya was warm and fed and happy, sleeping in a comfortable bed without fear of eviction or hunger. Everything else was just noise. Even if the noise sounded a lot like Victoria's voice in his head, asking him who he was becoming, whether this was really who he wanted to be. Ethan closed his eyes and didn't have an answer. The answer to Victoria's question came 3 days later, standing in front of a full-length mirror while a stylist adjusted his bow tie. Thursday evening arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Ethan had spent the intervening days trying to learn everything he could about the Chicago Business Foundation Gala, who attended, what they expected, how to navigate conversations with people who'd been wealthy their entire lives. Oliver Pembroke's team had sent briefing materials on key figures he should know, major donors he might encounter, and the general etiquette of high society charity events. None of it made him feel less like an imposter. "Stop fidgeting," the stylist said, a woman named Patricia who'd arrived at the suite an hour ago with 3 different tuxedo options. "You look fine. Better than fine. I look like I'm playing dress-up. You look like someone who belongs at a gala. Trust me, I've dressed enough insecure rich men to know the difference." She stepped back, examining her work. There. Perfect. Ethan looked at his reflection and saw a stranger again. The tuxedo was midnight blue, custom-fitted, with a crisp white shirt and black bow tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was styled just enough to look intentional without seeming like he'd tried too hard. He looked like he belonged in Victoria's world now. The thought made his stomach turn. "Maya?" he called toward the bedroom. "Come here for a second." His daughter appeared in the doorway wearing her pajamas, already ready for bed, even though it was only 6:30. Sarah had agreed to stay late tonight, and Maya seemed more excited about the prospect of watching movies and eating popcorn than bothered by her father going out. "Wow," Maya breathed. "Daddy, you look like a movie star." "I look ridiculous." "No, you look fancy, like a prince going to a ball." "It's not a ball, it's a boring work thing." "With dancing?" "Maybe some dancing." "Then it's a ball." Maya's logic was unassailable. She walked closer and reached up to touch his bow tie. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "Why?" "You're the richest person there, probably." "That's not how it works, sweetheart. And even if I was, that doesn't mean I know what I'm doing." Maya considered this with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. "Mrs. Chen at my old school always said fake it till you make it." "Mrs. Chen was your lunch lady." "She was very smart about things." Ethan laughed despite himself and crouched down to hug his daughter. "I'll try to remember that. You be good for Sarah, okay? I'm always good." "That's debatable." The Bentley arrived at 7:15 to drive him to the Four Seasons Hotel where the gala was being held. Ethan spent the ride staring out the window at Chicago passing by, trying to calm the anxiety crawling up his spine. This wasn't a business meeting where he could rely on attorneys and financial data. This was socializing, making conversation, pretending he'd always moved in circles where charity galas were normal. The Four Seasons entrance was chaos. Luxury cars lined up to discharge passengers in evening gowns and tuxedos. Photographers clustered near the door, cameras flashing as recognizable faces emerged from vehicles. A red carpet, an actual red carpet, led from the curb to the hotel entrance. Ethan's driver pulled up and opened his door. "Good luck, Mr. Cole." "Thanks. I'm going to need it." The cameras flashed as he stepped out, though he doubted anyone knew who he was. Just another wealthy person at a wealthy event, interchangeable and forgettable. He followed the flow of guests through the entrance into a massive ballroom that looked like something out of a period drama. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with classical frescoes. Round tables covered in white linens filled the space, each decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces. A stage at the far end held a podium and a screen for presentations. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than Ethan used to spend on entire meals. "Mr. Cole?" A woman in an elegant black dress approached with a tablet. "I'm Melissa with the foundation. We have you at table 7 near the front. Can I show you to your seat?" "Please." Table 7 turned out to be positioned prominently, with a clear view of the stage. The name card at his assigned seat read Ethan Cole, Cole Properties International. Apparently someone on Pembroke's team had decided that was his company name now. The cards at neighboring seats showed names Ethan vaguely recognized from the briefing materials: a tech CEO, a hospital administrator, the owner of a local sports team. No sign of Victoria yet, but the evening was young. "Ethan Cole?" A man's voice came from behind him. "I'm Marcus Brennan. We haven't met, but I manage the Lakefront Tower portfolio. Your grandfather and I did business together for years. Ethan turned to find a man in his 60s, white hair, expensive watch, warm smile. They shook hands, and Marcus launched into stories about Jonathan Cole, painting a picture of Ethan's grandfather as shrewd but fair, demanding but loyal to people who proved themselves. He talked about you once, Marcus said. About a year before he passed, said he'd found his grandson but wasn't sure how to approach you. I told him just to call, but Jonathan was stubborn about things like that, wanted to wait until the right moment. A sad smile. I guess he ran out of time. I wish I'd known him, Ethan said, surprised to find he meant it. He would have been proud of you, taking over the portfolio, handling it personally, instead of just letting managers do everything. That's what he would have done. More guests arrived, and Marcus introduced him around. A real estate developer, a city councilwoman, a philanthropist whose family name was on half the museums in Chicago. Everyone was polite, friendly, curious about Jonathan Cole's mysterious heir. Ethan deflected personal questions and stuck to generic statements about honoring his grandfather's legacy and learning the business. He was midway through a conversation about property development downtown when he saw her. Victoria entered through the main doors on Preston Hale's arm, wearing a floor-length emerald dress that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style, diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, and her smile was practiced perfection as she greeted people near the entrance. She looked stunning. She looked happy. She looked like someone who hadn't spent the last week sending desperate texts to her ex-boyfriend. Ethan forced himself to look away and focus on the conversation he was supposed to be having. Something about zoning regulations and the city council. He nodded and made appropriate sounds while tracking Victoria's movement through the room in his peripheral vision. She and Preston worked their way from table to table, schmoozing and laughing and playing the part of a power couple. Several times, Victoria's gaze swept the room, and Ethan knew she was looking for him, but he kept his attention elsewhere, refusing to give her the satisfaction of knowing he'd noticed her arrival. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll start finding your seats, we'll be beginning shortly. The announcement came from the stage, and the crowd began migrating toward their assigned tables. Victoria and Preston were seated at table 12, on the opposite side of the room. Ethan watched them settle in, watched Preston pull out Victoria's chair, watched her laugh at something he said while placing her hand on his arm. The gesture looked automatic, practiced, fake, or maybe Ethan was just telling himself that. The gala program started with a welcome speech from the foundation's president, a woman in her 70s who'd apparently donated millions to Chicago schools and hospitals. She talked about the importance of giving back, of using wealth to improve communities, of the responsibility that came with success. Ethan found himself actually listening instead of just waiting for it to be over. The foundation supported programs for homeless families, job training for people trying to rebuild their lives, scholarships for kids from struggling neighborhoods. All things that, a week ago, he would have needed himself. The thought settled uncomfortably in his chest. Dinner was served, some kind of fish that Ethan couldn't identify, but that tasted expensive, and conversation at his table turned to business ventures and investment opportunities. Ethan mostly listened, learning more from what people said casually over wine than he'd learned from hours of reading briefing documents. Between courses, people circulated to network. Ethan found himself shaking hands with a steady stream of executives and entrepreneurs, all of them wanting to introduce themselves to Jonathan Cole's heir. Some were genuinely warm, others obviously calculating what they could gain from the connection, but all of them treated him like he belonged here. It was surreal. Ethan Cole. The voice was familiar and unwelcome. Fancy seeing you here. Ethan turned to find Preston Hale standing behind him, champagne flute in hand, expression friendly but eyes calculating. Mr. Hale. Please, call me Preston. We're practically family, right? Both dating the same woman at different times. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I don't think that's how family works. No, I suppose not. Preston took a sip of champagne. Victoria told me about the lease situation. Sounds like you drove a hard bargain. I offered fair market terms. After humiliating her in front of her colleagues, Ethan set down his own glass carefully. I negotiated a business deal. If she felt humiliated, that's about her expectations, not my behavior. Come on, Ethan, you can drop the act with me. We both know what that meeting was about. Preston leaned closer, lowering his voice. You wanted her to see what she'd missed out on. Wanted to rub her face in your sudden wealth. I get it. I probably would have done the same thing, but now you've made your point, so maybe it's time to move on? I have moved on. Have you? Because showing up here, dressed like that, knowing she'd be here, that doesn't look like moving on. That looks like you're still playing games. Heat flared in Ethan's chest. I was invited to this gala because my properties are major sponsors. I have every right to be here, whether Victoria likes it or not. Sure. Just like you had every right to personally handle that lease negotiation instead of letting your attorneys do it. Technically correct, but we both know the real motivation. Preston's expression hardened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to start something here. I'm just saying that Victoria's been through enough. She made a mistake with how she handled your breakup. She knows that. She's admitted it. But continuing to twist the knife isn't making you look good. Interesting advice from the man who was seeing her before we broke up. Preston's jaw tightened. That's not what happened. No? When did you two start exactly? That's between Victoria and me. Right. Well, here's what's between you and me. Nothing. We have no relationship, no connection, and no reason to keep talking. Enjoy your evening. Ethan turned and walked away before Preston could respond, his heart hammering. He made it to the bar and ordered a whiskey he didn't really want, trying to calm the anger burning through his veins. That looked tense. Marcus Brennan appeared beside him, ordering his own drink. Preston Hale? Yeah. He's a piece of work. Took over Hartman Enterprises from his father and immediately started cutting corners to boost profits. Your grandfather refused to do business with him after Preston tried to back out of a deal midway through. Called him a man without honor. Smart grandfather. The smartest. And for what it's worth, whatever he said to you, don't let it get under your skin. Men like Preston only have power if you give it to them. The keynote speech started before Ethan could respond, drawing everyone back to their tables. The speaker was a formerly homeless woman who'd built a successful business after getting help from one of the foundation's programs. Her story was powerful, genuine, and uncomfortably familiar. She talked about sleeping in her car with her kids, about choosing between food and gas, about the shame of needing help and the gratitude when she finally received it. Ethan thought about the laundromat bench and felt sick. After the speech, the foundation president announced the evening's fundraising goals and encouraged donations. A silent auction was happening in an adjoining room, with items ranging from vacation packages to artwork to private dinners with celebrities. People began moving around again as dessert was served, and Ethan found himself alone at his table while his table mates networked. He was considering leaving early, he'd made an appearance, that was enough, when Victoria appeared in the empty chair beside him. We need to talk, she said without preamble. No, we don't. Ethan, please. 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to you. Then just listen. She glanced around to make sure no one was paying attention, then leaned closer. What you're doing isn't fair. What am I doing? This. Showing up here, looking like that, making sure I see you living the life I thought you'd never have. It's cruel. Ethan finally looked at her directly. Up close, he could see the makeup covering dark circles under her eyes. Could see the tension in her jaw, the tight set of her shoulders. You want to talk about cruel? He asked quietly. Let's talk about telling a man counting quarters that he's small. Let's talk about ending a relationship by bringing your new boyfriend to deliver the news. Let's talk about doing all of that in front of his 6-year-old daughter. Victoria's face flushed. I apologized for that. No, you didn't. You said you made a mistake. That's not an apology, that's damage control. Fine. I'm sorry. I'm genuinely, truly sorry for how I handled things. I should have been kinder. I should have waited until we were alone. I should have what? Not left me? Not traded up for someone with a better bank account? That's not fair. You know our relationship was struggling before the money became an issue. Was it? Because from where I was sitting, things were fine until I lost my job. Then suddenly, every conversation became about my failures, my lack of ambition, my small life. Ethan's voice stayed level, but the words cut anyway. You didn't fall out of love with me, Victoria. You fell out of respect for me because I wasn't climbing a corporate ladder fast enough. That's not true. Then why are you here with Preston? What does he have that made him worth leaving me for? Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He understands the world I live in. The pressure, the expectations, the constant need to prove yourself. You never understood that. Because I was busy trying to keep my daughter fed. I know that. And I'm not saying you weren't trying. But Ethan, you have to see this from my perspective too. I worked so hard to build my career, to get where I am. And every time I'd come to your apartment and see you just accepting the situation, not fighting harder, not pushing yourself, it felt like I was watching you give up. I never gave up. I was surviving. It didn't look like surviving, it looked like surrendering. The words hung between them like smoke. Ethan stood up. This conversation is over. Wait, no! You've said enough. You've made it very clear how you saw me, how you still see me. The only difference now is that I have money, and suddenly that makes me worth your time again. But here's what you don't understand, Victoria. I'd rather have nothing and know someone loves me for who I am than have everything and be wanted for what I have. That's easy to say when you have everything, is it? Because a week ago I had nothing, and I was still a good father. I was still a decent person. I was still worth something. The money didn't change that. It just revealed what you actually valued. Victoria's eyes were bright with tears she was fighting not to shed. I did love you. That was real. Maybe. But it wasn't strong enough to survive me being poor, so what was it worth? He walked away before she could respond, heading for the exit. He needed air, space, distance from the perfume and champagne and pretense. The hotel's terrace was mostly empty, just a few people smoking cigarettes and having quiet conversations. Ethan leaned against the railing and looked out at the Chicago River below, its surface reflecting the city lights. You handled that well. Ethan turned to find Marcus Brennan emerging from the shadows, another whiskey in hand. You were listening? Hard not to. She wasn't exactly being subtle. Marcus joined him at the railing. For what it's worth, your grandfather would have approved. Of what? Me arguing with my ex at a charity gala? Of you not letting someone make you feel small. Jonathan hated people who measured worth by bank accounts. He came from nothing himself, built his entire fortune from a single rundown building in London. Never forgot where he started, never let anyone convince him that having money made him better than anyone else. Ethan absorbed that. I didn't know. He didn't advertise it, but it's why he was so generous with the foundation, why he gave so much to programs helping people in poverty. He remembered what it felt like to be desperate. I remember too. I was desperate last week. I know, Victoria mentioned your situation to some people when you two were together. She wasn't kind about it. That stung more than Ethan wanted to admit. What did she say? That you were struggling, that she was trying to help but you were too proud, that she didn't know how much longer she could watch you fail. Marcus sipped his drink. For what it's worth, I never thought it was about pride. Sometimes life just kicks you down and it takes a while to get back up. Yeah, sometimes it does. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the river flow past. Can I give you some advice? Marcus asked. Old man to young man? Sure. This anger you're carrying toward her, it's understandable, it's justified, but it's also going to eat you alive if you let it. Not because she deserves your forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. I don't know how to get there. Time, distance, and focusing on what actually matters. Marcus gestured back toward the ballroom. All these people in there, they'll try to tell you that this is what matters. The galas, the networking, the social climbing. But your grandfather knew better. What mattered to him was his integrity, his principles, and the people he chose to care about. He died with billions of dollars and a handful of real friends. Made sure the money went to family and charity, not to people who only loved him for what he could give them. I don't know if I have his principles. You do. You proved it in that meeting at Meridian. You could have destroyed Victoria's company out of spite, but you offered fair terms instead. That's integrity, even when it would have felt good to be cruel. It did feel good, Ethan admitted. Seeing her realize I owned her building. Watching her lose control in front of her bosses. I'm not proud of it, but it felt good. Human nature. Doesn't make you a bad person, just makes you human. Marcus finished his drink. But here's the thing about revenge. It's a meal that tastes sweet and digests like poison. You've had your moment. You've proven your point. Now the question is what kind of man you want to be going forward. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, Maya's babysitter. Maya's fine, but she had a nightmare about the old apartment. Asked for you. I calmed her down and she's sleeping again, but thought you should know. The message hit Ethan like cold water. While he'd been here, playing dress-up at a gala and arguing with Victoria about who had hurt whom worse, his daughter had been scared and asking for him. I need to go, he said to Marcus. Everything okay? My daughter, she's fine, but I need to be there. Marcus smiled. See? You already know what matters. Your grandfather would have done the same thing, left a room full of millionaires to be there for family. Ethan shook his hand and headed for the exit, not bothering to make excuses or say goodbye to anyone else. He texted his driver to meet him at the entrance and was in the Bentley within 5 minutes, the gala fading behind him like a dream. The ride back to the peninsula took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Ethan kept seeing Maya's face from that night in the apartment, small, scared, trying to be brave while her world fell apart around her. She'd been through too much, lost her mother too young, watched her father struggle and fail, lived in poverty that no child should experience. And now everything had changed again, and of course she was having nightmares. He should have been there, should have stayed home, stayed with her, instead of going to some stupid event just to prove a point to a woman who didn't matter anymore. The suite was quiet when he entered. Sarah looked up from the couch where she'd been reading. She okay? Ethan asked quietly. She's fine now. Woke up crying about 20 minutes ago, said she dreamed you'd lost all the money and you were back in the old apartment. I reminded her where she was, showed her the room, let her call you, but you didn't answer. The gala was loud, I didn't hear it ring. It's fine, she calmed down after a few minutes. I read her a story, and she went back to sleep. Ethan moved to the bedroom door and opened it carefully. Maya was curled up in the big bed, clutching both her old rabbit and her new one, her face peaceful in sleep. He stood there watching her breathe, feeling his heart rate slowly return to normal. Mr. Cole? Sarah's voice was soft behind him. Can I say something? Of course. I don't know what you've been through, and it's none of my business, but that little girl in there loves you more than anything in the world. More than this suite, more than new toys, more than all the money you could ever have. So whatever else is going on in your life, whatever you're dealing with, just make sure you don't lose sight of that. I won't, Ethan promised. After Sarah left, he changed out of the tuxedo and into sweatpants and a t-shirt, then climbed into bed next to Maya. She stirred and mumbled something, then rolled over and pressed against his side the way she used to when she was smaller. Daddy? Her voice was sleepy and small. I'm here, baby. You came back. I'll always come back. Promise? Promise. She sighed and settled back into sleep, one hand gripping his shirt like an anchor. Ethan lay there in the dark, listening to his daughter breathe, and thought about Marcus Brennan's words. What kind of man did he want to be going forward? Not the man who'd spent the evening at a gala measuring himself against Victoria's new boyfriend. Not the man who'd taken satisfaction in her discomfort, her tears, her realization that she'd made a mistake. He wanted to be the man Maya believed in, the man who'd kept her safe through the worst of times, the man who'd counted quarters for groceries and still made her smile. The money hadn't changed that person. It had just surrounded him with noise and distractions and opportunities for pettiness. Ethan pulled Maya closer and made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd call Oliver Pembroke and ask about the foundation his grandfather had supported, the one that helped homeless families and struggling parents, the one that could have helped him a week ago if he'd known it existed. He had resources now, time to use them for something that actually mattered. Victoria could think whatever she wanted about him. Preston could make whatever judgments felt good. The people at the gala could gossip about the mysterious heir and his drama with his ex-girlfriend. None of it mattered compared to the 6-year-old sleeping against his shoulder, trusting him to keep the nightmares away. But even as Ethan closed his eyes and tried to sleep, he couldn't quite shake the image of Victoria's face when she'd said she loved him. The tears she'd fought back, the genuine pain in her voice. Had he been cruel? Had he twisted the knife when mercy would have been stronger? The questions followed him into uneasy dreams where he couldn't tell the difference between justice and revenge, between protecting himself and causing harm, between being the man he wanted to be and becoming someone he wouldn't recognize. When he woke in the morning, Maya was already up, sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed and watching cartoons on the tablet Sarah had left for her. Morning, Daddy. Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep? Good. After you came home. She paused the cartoon and looked at him seriously. Did you have fun at your ball? Not really. Why not? It was complicated. Was Victoria there? Ethan sat up, surprised. How did you know about Victoria? I heard you talking on the phone, and you've been sad since she left. Maya crawled closer. Did you see her at the ball? Yeah, I did. Did you talk to her? A little bit. Are you still sad? Ethan pulled Maya into a hug. You know what? I don't think I am. Not anymore. And as he said it, he realized it might actually be true. The anger was still there. The hurt was still there. But the sadness, the heavy weight of loss and betrayal, had lifted sometime between the gala and this morning. Victoria was gone from his life. That chapter was over. What came next was up to him. The realization that he was done being sad lasted approximately 6 hours. That's how long it took before Oliver Pembroke called with news that shattered Ethan's fragile sense of moving forward. It was Saturday morning. Ethan had taken Maya to breakfast at a diner, a regular diner, not some expensive restaurant, because she'd asked for pancakes and he'd wanted to feel normal for a few hours. They were halfway through a stack when his phone rang. Mr. Cole, I apologize for calling on the weekend, but something's come up that requires your immediate attention. Ethan set down his fork, watching Maya color on the paper placemat the waitress had given her. What kind of something? Victoria Langford has filed a lawsuit against you. It was submitted yesterday evening, and my office was served with papers this morning. The diner suddenly felt too loud. A lawsuit for what? Fraud, emotional manipulation, and breach of implied contract. She's claiming you deliberately concealed your inheritance during your relationship, that you used her emotional and financial support under false pretenses, and that you're now retaliating against her professionally because she ended the relationship. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. That's insane. I didn't know about the inheritance until after she left. I'm aware, and we can prove that through the timeline of my firm's contact with you. But Mr. Cole, there's more. She's also filed a complaint with the Chicago Business Ethics Commission claiming you're using your property ownership to unfairly target Meridian Capital Group due to personal grievances. She's requesting a formal investigation into whether your business practices constitute harassment. I offered them standard market terms, which her filing acknowledges, but she's arguing that your decision to personally conduct the negotiation and your confrontational behavior during the meeting created a hostile business environment. She's painting a picture of you as vindictive and unprofessional. Maya looked up from her coloring. Daddy? You okay? Ethan forced a smile and nodded, then turned away slightly. What does she want? Money, primarily. The lawsuit seeks $5 million in damages, but I think the real goal is public pressure. She's already given statements to 2 business publications about being harassed by a former partner who suddenly came into wealth. The articles will run Monday morning. She's trying to destroy my reputation. She's trying to control the narrative. And Mr. Cole, there's one more thing. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune called my office asking about allegations of financial impropriety in your grandfather's estate. Someone has been feeding them questions about whether the inheritance is legitimate, whether proper taxes were paid, whether you have legal right to the assets. Ethan closed his eyes. Victoria, we don't know that for certain, but the timing is suspicious. The good news is that your grandfather's estate is immaculate. Every dollar documented, every tax paid, everything beyond reproach. But defending against these allegations will be time-consuming and expensive, and the mere existence of questions will create problems. What kind of problems? Reputation damage. Business partners who get nervous about association. Banks that become cautious about extending credit. You're new to this world, Mr. Cole, and perception matters enormously. If people start to believe you're involved in shady dealings or that you're unstable and vindictive, it will cost you opportunities. So she's trying to make me look as bad as possible. Yes. And unfortunately, she has a platform to do it from. She's well connected in Chicago business circles. She has Preston Hale's resources backing her, and she's positioned herself as the victim of a suddenly wealthy ex-boyfriend who can't handle rejection. Ethan watched Maya carefully coloring a flower, completely oblivious to the war being waged around her. What do? We fight back. We file countermotions to dismiss the lawsuit as frivolous. We prepare detailed documentation of the timeline proving you had no knowledge of the inheritance during your relationship. We contact the publications and provide our side of the story. and we start looking very carefully at Victoria's own business practices. What does that mean? Oliver's voice became very careful. It means that when someone attacks this aggressively, they're often trying to deflect attention from their own vulnerabilities. I'm suggesting we audit Meridian Capital's finances, particularly Victoria's department. If she's accusing you of impropriety, we should ensure she has no skeletons in her own closet. You think she's hiding something? I think people who are perfectly clean don't usually launch scorched earth campaigns. They negotiate quietly. The fact that she's going public and going hard suggests she's desperate about something. Do it, Ethan said. Whatever you need to do, do it. Understood. I'll have my team start immediately, and in the meantime, I need you to avoid any contact with Ms. Langford or Mr. Hale. Don't respond to calls, texts, emails, nothing. Any communication gets forwarded to my office. After the call ended, Ethan sat staring at his cold pancakes while Maya chattered about her coloring. Daddy, look! I made the flower purple because purple is better than pink. Do you think it's better? It's perfect, baby. You're not even looking. He looked. The flower was indeed purple, with green leaves and a yellow center. You're right, purple is definitely better. Maya beamed and went back to coloring, satisfied. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he opened it. You brought this on yourself. All you had to do was leave me alone, but you couldn't let it go. Now everyone's going to see who you really are. B. So she was using a new number after he'd blocked her. Ethan deleted the message without responding and blocked this number too. Another text came through immediately from a different number. Ignoring me won't make this go away. I have evidence of everything. The way you ambushed me in that meeting, the way you've been stalking me at events, the threatening messages you sent. I've documented all of it. Threatening messages? Ethan scrolled back through their text history, the one he'd saved before blocking her original number, and found nothing that could remotely be considered threatening. Direct? Yes. Angry? Maybe. But threatening? Unless she was lying. Unless she was fabricating evidence to support her narrative. The thought made him feel sick. A third text. Preston's attorneys are a lot better than yours. They've handled cases against billionaires before. You're out of your depth. Ethan turned off his phone entirely and focused on his daughter, on finishing breakfast, on pretending everything was fine. But his mind was racing through scenarios, through possibilities, through the realization that he'd underestimated how far Victoria would go. She wasn't just upset about the breakup or embarrassed by the lease negotiation. She was actively trying to destroy him. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls with attorneys, reviewing documentation, and preparing statements. Oliver Pembroke's team worked around the clock, and by Sunday evening, they'd assembled a comprehensive defense package. The timeline is unambiguous, Oliver explained during a video call while Maya slept in the next room. My firm's first contact with you was at 3:07 a.m. on the night you were evicted. Miss Langford ended your relationship at approximately 6:30 p.m. that same evening. There is no possible scenario in which you knew about the inheritance before she left you. So her lawsuit is baseless. Completely. But baseless lawsuits still require time and money to defend. That's part of her strategy. Make this expensive and exhausting for you. What about the ethics complaint? Also weak. You're allowed to personally manage your properties. You're allowed to negotiate directly with tenants. The fact that you have a personal history with one of their executives doesn't constitute harassment unless you actually harassed her, which the meeting records don't support. And the media stuff? Oliver's expression darkened. That's the real problem. The lawsuit and ethics complaint are theater. The media campaign is the actual weapon. She's given interviews portraying herself as a successful woman being punished by a bitter ex with newfound power. It's a compelling narrative, especially in the current climate around workplace harassment and abuse of power. But it's not true. Truth and perception are different things, Mr. Cole. We need to get ahead of this before the Monday articles run. How? We give our own interview. We show your side, the struggling single father who was abandoned and then inherited wealth he didn't know existed. We present you as someone trying to move forward, not someone seeking revenge. And we let the timeline speak for itself. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I don't want to be in the media. I understand, but if you're not, Victoria controls the narrative entirely. Fine. Set it up. Monday morning came too early. Ethan woke to find his phone flooded with notifications. The articles had run, both of them, plus 3 more he hadn't known about. The headlines made his stomach turn. Billionaire's revenge, new heir accused of harassment campaign against ex-girlfriend. From rags to riches to lawsuits, Chicago property mogul faces ethics probe. Victoria Langford speaks out. I helped him when he had nothing, now he's trying to destroy me. The articles were brutal. They quoted Victoria extensively, describing Ethan as manipulative, deceitful, and dangerous. They included anonymous sources from people familiar with the situation, claiming Ethan had always been controlling and possessive. They painted a picture of a man who'd suddenly gained power and was using it to punish a woman who'd dared to leave him. The only quote from Ethan's side was a brief statement from Oliver's office saying the allegations were false and would be addressed in court. Ethan's phone rang. Marcus Brennan. I saw the articles, Marcus said without preamble. How bad is it? Pretty bad. I'm calling because I got contacted by 2 of those reporters asking for comments about you. They wanted to know if I'd witnessed you being unstable or aggressive at the gala. What did you say? I told them you were perfectly professional and that Victoria Langford was the one who approached you, not the other way around. But Ethan, they're calling everyone. They're building a case, assembling a narrative. This is a coordinated attack. I know. Do you have good attorneys? The best, apparently. Good. Use them. And listen, don't underestimate Preston Hale. He's bankrolling this, and he has deep pockets and a vindictive streak. This isn't just Victoria being upset. This is a calculated assault. After the call, Ethan forced himself to read all the articles thoroughly. The quotes from Victoria were damning. I supported him emotionally and financially for months while he struggled, she'd told the Tribune. I never asked for anything in return because I cared about him and his daughter. When I realized the relationship wasn't healthy for either of us, I ended it as gently as I could. Days later, he inherited billions and immediately began using that power against me. He forced a confrontational meeting where he humiliated me in front of my colleagues. He shows up at events he knows I'll attend. He sends threatening messages in the middle of the night. I'm terrified of what he might do next. Threatening messages in the middle of the night. The text he'd sent after the gala, the one about consequences, about her seeing him around and remembering her choice. She'd twisted it into something sinister. The reporter interview Oliver had arranged was scheduled for that afternoon at a neutral location. Ethan spent the morning rehearsing answers with Pembroke's media team, learning how to stay calm, how to stick to facts, how to avoid sounding defensive or aggressive. Remember, the media consultant said, you're not arguing with Victoria. You're presenting the truth. Stay factual, stay sympathetic, and let the timeline do the heavy lifting. The interview took place in a conference room at a downtown hotel. The journalist was a woman named Carol Chen from the Chicago Business Journal, sharp-eyed and professional. Mr. Cole, thank you for sitting down with me. I know this is a difficult situation. Thank you for the opportunity to address it. Let's start with the basic timeline. When did you first learn about your inheritance? Ethan walked her through that night. The laundromat, the phone call, the complete shock of Oliver Pembroke's news. He showed her phone records proving the timeline, bank statements showing his financial situation before the inheritance, even the hotel check-in records from the peninsula. So you had no knowledge of this inheritance when Ms. Langford ended your relationship? None whatsoever. I was literally sitting on a bench outside a laundromat with my daughter, and everything we owned in garbage bags when I got the call. Victoria had left us about 9 hours earlier. Carol made notes. Ms. Langford claims you deliberately concealed the inheritance to manipulate her emotionally. How do you respond to that? It's impossible. I didn't know about it. My grandfather's attorneys can confirm they had no contact with me before that night. There's nothing to conceal. What about the lease negotiation with Meridian Capital? Ms. Langford characterizes it as harassment. I inherited a commercial property. They're a tenant requesting renewal terms. I reviewed those terms and determined they weren't favorable, so I offered standard market rates instead. That's not harassment, that's business. But you chose to conduct the meeting personally rather than through representatives. Why? Ethan paused. This was the tricky part. Telling the truth that he'd wanted to face Victoria, wanted her to see what she'd walked away from, would support her narrative. But lying would come across as dishonest. I wanted to understand the property and its major tenants, he said carefully. I'm new to this industry, and meeting face-to-face with significant stakeholders seemed like good practice. I didn't realize until I reviewed the briefing materials that Victoria worked there. At that point, I considered rescheduling but decided that would be unprofessional. We're both adults. I thought we could handle a business meeting. And could you? I could. She struggled with it, which I understand, but I maintained professional boundaries throughout. Ms. Langford says you humiliated her in front of her colleagues. I negotiated firmly. I challenged their proposal with financial data. If she felt humiliated by that, I'm sorry, but I didn't do anything inappropriate. Carol leaned forward. Mr. Cole, can I be frank with you? Please. Your story is compelling. The timeline is clear. But here's what people are going to ask. If you're truly over this relationship and just trying to move forward, why are you showing up at the same charity galas? Why are you staying in Chicago at all when you have properties worldwide? It creates an impression that you're deliberately maintaining proximity to Ms. Langford. Sad. Ethan felt the trap closing. I'm staying in Chicago because it's my daughter's home. It's where she went to school, where she has memories of her mother. I'm not going to uproot her life again just to avoid occasionally being at the same events as my ex-girlfriend. That would be letting Victoria dictate my choices, and I won't do that. Fair enough. Last question. Ms. Langford is seeking $5 million in damages. Will you settle? No, because settling would validate false allegations. I'll defend myself in court and let the facts speak for themselves. The interview lasted another 30 minutes, covering everything from his relationship with Maya to his plans for the real estate portfolio. Carol was thorough but fair, and by the end, Ethan felt cautiously optimistic that his side would at least get heard. The article ran Wednesday morning under the headline, "The Other Side, Ethan Cole Responds to Harassment Allegations." It was balanced, presenting both narratives and letting readers decide. The comments section immediately exploded with arguments about who was telling the truth, whether Victoria was a gold digger or a victim, whether Ethan was vindictive or justified. But the court of public opinion was just noise. The real battle was happening in Oliver Pembroke's offices, where the legal team was building their defense. And on Thursday morning, they found something. "Mr. Cole, we need to meet immediately," Oliver said over the phone, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "We've discovered information about Miss Langford that changes everything." Ethan arranged for Sarah to watch Maya and took a car to Pembroke's office. The conference room was full. Oliver, the sharp-eyed attorney whose name he'd learned was Jennifer Costa, and two forensic accountants he didn't recognize. "What did you find?" Ethan asked. Jennifer opened a laptop and turned it toward him. "We conducted a comprehensive audit of Meridian Capital Group's financial records, focusing specifically on Victoria Langford's department operations over the past 3 years. What we found is systematic embezzlement." Ethan stared at the spreadsheet on screen. "What?" "Ms. Langford has been creating fake consulting contracts with shell companies she controls," one of the accountants explained. "The companies bill Meridian for services that were never rendered. Meridian pays the invoices, and the money ends up in offshore accounts linked to Ms. Langford." "How much?" "Approximately $2.7 million over 3 years. The number hit Ethan like a physical blow. She stole almost $3 million? Yes, and she was very careful about it. Amounts small enough not to trigger automatic audits, spread across multiple vendors, documented with falsified records. But once we started looking specifically at her department's expenses, the pattern became clear." Oliver leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, this is a federal crime. Wire fraud, tax evasion, corporate embezzlement. If we present this evidence to the authorities, Ms. Langford will face criminal prosecution. We're talking years in prison." Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Victoria had been stealing money while telling him he was the failure. He was the one dragging her down. He was the one who couldn't get his life together. She'd been committing felonies while climbing the corporate ladder and presenting herself as successful. "Does Meridian know?" he asked. "Not yet. This is privileged information we obtained through our investigation of your property's tenant. We're not obligated to report it, though we can if you choose. And if I don't report it, we use it as leverage in the lawsuit. We inform Ms. Langford's attorneys that we have evidence of her criminal activity, and we offer a deal. She drops all claims against you, issues a public retraction, and we don't pursue criminal charges. But she still gets away with stealing $3 million. From Meridian, yes. Though if you feel strongly about it, We can submit an anonymous tip to Meridian's compliance department separately from the lawsuit negotiations. Ethan looked at the spreadsheet again, at the careful columns of fraudulent invoices, at the evidence of Victoria's systematic deception. This was it. This was the weapon that would end everything. He could destroy her completely. Criminal charges, prison time, public disgrace. Everything she'd built would collapse. "What happens if I report this to the authorities directly?" he asked. Oliver exchanged glances with Jennifer. "She gets arrested, prosecuted, and likely convicted. The evidence is overwhelming. She'd probably take a plea deal for reduced sentencing, but she'd still serve time. Her career would be over. Her reputation would be destroyed. And the lawsuit against me would likely be dropped immediately once she's facing criminal charges. Hard to maintain a civil suit when you're being indicted." Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out at Chicago stretched below. Somewhere in this city, Victoria was probably at her desk at Meridian, working, completely unaware that her entire life was about to implode. He thought about Maya's nightmare, about her fear that they'd lose everything again. Thought about Sarah's words, "That little girl loves you more than anything in the world." He thought about Marcus Brennan saying revenge was a meal that tasted sweet and digested like poison. "I want to talk to her," Ethan said. "Mr. Cole, I strongly advise against— I want to talk to her face to face, with attorneys present. I want her to know what we found, and I want to give her one chance to walk away from this cleanly." "Why?" Jennifer asked. "She's been trying to destroy you. She's been lying to the media, filing frivolous lawsuits, attempting to ruin your reputation. Why give her any chance at all?" "Because I don't want to be the person who sends his daughter's almost stepmother to prison," Ethan said quietly. "Maya already lost her mother. She doesn't need to watch someone else she cared about get destroyed, even if that person deserves it." Oliver nodded slowly. "I understand. We'll arrange a mediation, but Mr. Cole, you need to be prepared for the possibility that she won't take the deal. Some people would rather fight than admit defeat. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." The mediation was scheduled for the following Monday at a neutral attorney's office. Victoria arrived with Preston and two lawyers Ethan didn't recognize. Expensive suits, expensive briefcases, expensive arrogance. Victoria looked tired. The polished veneer she'd worn at the gala was cracked, showing dark circles under her eyes and tension in her jaw. But her expression was hard, defensive, ready for battle. They sat on opposite sides of a long conference table. The mediator, a retired judge named Ellen Vasquez, explained the ground rules. "This is a voluntary mediation. Anything said here is confidential and cannot be used in court. The goal is to see if we can reach a resolution without litigation. Mr. Cole's team requested this meeting. Mr. Pembroke, you have the floor." Oliver opened a folder and slid a single page across the table to Victoria's attorneys. "That's a summary of evidence we've obtained regarding Ms. Langford's financial activities at Meridian Capital Group. The full documentation is available for your review." One of Victoria's attorneys picked up the summary. His expression went from skeptical to concerned to alarmed in about 30 seconds. He leaned over and whispered something to his colleague. Victoria frowned. "What is that?" Her attorney didn't answer, still reading. Preston leaned over to look at the document, and Ethan watched his face change too. The confidence drained away, replaced by something colder. "This is fabricated," Preston said flatly. "You're making up evidence to—" "It's not fabricated," Jennifer interrupted. "We have 3 years of documentation. Bank records, corporate filings, email correspondence with the shell companies, transaction histories. It's all real, it's all admissible, and it's all illegal." Victoria grabbed the summary from her attorney and read it herself. The color drained from her face. This isn't—" She looked at her attorneys. "They can't have this. This is private financial information. They don't have access to—" "We obtained it legally through our audit of Mr. Cole's property tenant," Oliver said calmly, "and we verified every detail. Ms. Langford, you've been embezzling money from your employer for 3 years. That's wire fraud, corporate theft, and tax evasion. Federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences." The room went silent. Victoria's hands were shaking. She set down the paper and looked directly at Ethan for the first time since the mediation began. "You bastard," she whispered. "You did this. You went digging into my life to find something to use against me." "You filed a lawsuit against me," Ethan replied quietly. "You went to the media. You tried to destroy my reputation and my business. What did you expect me to do? Not this, not... Her voice broke. You're going to send me to prison. That's up to you, Oliver said. We're here to offer a deal. You drop the lawsuit, you issue a public statement retracting your allegations, and we don't report this evidence to the authorities. Preston slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. No, this is negotiation, Jennifer corrected. Extortion would be demanding money. We're simply asking Ms. Langford to stop her unfounded legal attack in exchange for our discretion about her criminal activity. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court, one of Victoria's attorneys said, but his voice lacked conviction. Would you like to take that chance? Oliver asked. Because we're very confident in our documentation. Victoria was crying now, tears streaming down her face while she tried to maintain composure. I needed that money. Do you have any idea what it cost to maintain the life I built? The apartment, the clothes, the social obligations? I couldn't do it on my salary alone. So you stole it, Ethan said. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back once I made partner. That's not how embezzlement works, Victoria. She looked at him with something between hatred and desperation. You're enjoying this, watching me fall apart. This is what you wanted all along. What I wanted was for you to leave me alone, Ethan said. You're the one who escalated this into warfare. I'm just defending myself. Preston leaned close to Victoria and whispered something Ethan couldn't hear. She shook her head violently, then whispered back. Their attorneys joined the huddle, creating a tense conference on their side of the table. Finally, Preston straightened and addressed the room. We need time to review the evidence and consider our options. This meeting is over. You have 48 hours, Oliver said. After that, we'll assume you're declining the offer and we'll proceed accordingly. Victoria stood abruptly and walked out without looking at anyone. Preston and the attorneys followed, leaving Ethan alone with his legal team. How do you think she'll respond? Ethan asked. Hard to say, Jennifer said. She's cornered, which makes people unpredictable. She might take the deal to avoid prison, or she might decide to fight and hope we're bluffing. We're not bluffing. No, but she might not believe that until it's too late. Ethan drove back to the peninsula in silence, his mind churning through scenarios. He'd wanted to give Victoria a chance to walk away cleanly, to avoid destroying her completely. But seeing her in that room, seeing her cry and accuse him of enjoying her pain, part of him had enjoyed it. Part of him had felt satisfied watching her realize she'd lost. And that scared him. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat on the terrace overlooking Chicago and tried to figure out who he was becoming. The broke construction worker who'd counted quarters was gone. The desperate father sleeping in a laundromat was gone. Even the man who'd walked into that first meeting with Oliver Pembroke was fading. In their place was someone harder, someone who knew how to use power, someone who discovered that having leverage meant having control. Was that better or worse? His phone rang. Oliver Pembroke. Mr. Cole, I just received a call from Victoria Langford's attorney. She's accepting the deal. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. She is? Yes. She'll drop the lawsuit, issue a public retraction, and cease all contact with you. In exchange, we won't report the embezzlement evidence to authorities. What about Meridian? Are we telling them? That's your decision. The deal only covers criminal prosecution, not civil liability or corporate consequences. Ethan thought about Richard Whitmore, about Marcus Chen, about all the people at Meridian who'd been working alongside a thief without knowing it. Send them an anonymous tip, he said. They deserve to know. Understood. I'll arrange it carefully to protect the source. The retraction statement will run in the same publications that printed her original allegations. This should be over by end of week. After the call ended, Ethan sat in the dark and waited to feel relieved. But relief didn't come. Just a hollow sense that he'd won a war nobody should have been fighting in the first place. Victoria's retraction ran Friday morning, buried in the business section where few people would see it compared to the front-page headlines her accusations had generated. The statement was brief and carefully worded. I have decided to withdraw my lawsuit against Ethan Cole and retract my previous statements regarding his conduct. After further reflection and review of the facts, I acknowledge that my characterizations were inaccurate and unfair. I apologize for any harm caused and wish Mr. Cole well in his future endeavors. It didn't admit wrongdoing, didn't explain the reversal, didn't give Ethan the vindication he probably deserved. But it was over. The anonymous tip to Meridian Capital's compliance department went out the same day. Ethan didn't know exactly what it said or how it was delivered, but by Monday afternoon, the Chicago Business Journal was reporting that Meridian's VP of Operations had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into financial irregularities. By Tuesday, Victoria had been fired. By Wednesday, she'd have been arrested at O'Hare International Airport, attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of cash and documents. Ethan found out about the arrest from a news alert on his phone while having lunch with Maya at the peninsula. The headline made his chest tighten. Former Meridian executive arrested on embezzlement charges, attempted to flee country. He opened the article and read about how Meridian's internal investigation had uncovered the fraud, how they'd reported it to federal authorities, how Victoria had panicked and tried to run. There was a photo of her in handcuffs being led through the airport by FBI agents, her face buried against her shoulder to hide from cameras. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Maya asked around a mouthful of grilled cheese. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just work stuff." But it wasn't nothing. Despite everything Victoria had done, despite the lawsuit, the media attacks, the lies, seeing her arrested made Ethan feel sick. He called Oliver immediately. "I thought we had a deal. I thought we weren't prosecuting." "We're not. We didn't report anything to authorities. Meridian did their own investigation based on the anonymous tip and found the evidence independently. Once they reported it, the situation was out of our hands. But I gave the tip, which you were ethically obligated to do. Meridian is one of your tenants. They have a right to know if an executive is stealing from them. What they chose to do with that information was their decision, not yours." She tried to run because she knew this was coming, because of what we found. Mr. Cole, Victoria Langford made every choice that led to this moment. She chose to embezzle money. She chose to attack you publicly. She chose to flee rather than face consequences. You didn't make any of those choices for her. Ethan knew Oliver was right. Logically, intellectually, he understood that Victoria's arrest was the result of her own actions. But emotionally, watching her get led away in handcuffs felt like something he'd caused. Like he'd set dominoes falling and now couldn't stop them. The news coverage was extensive. Reporters dug into Victoria's background, her relationship with Preston Hale, her rise through the corporate ranks. The narrative shifted from successful woman harassed by bitter ex to corporate criminal caught stealing millions. Preston gave one statement through his attorneys, distancing himself from Victoria and claiming he'd had no knowledge of her illegal activities. Within days, photos appeared of him with a different woman at a restaurant, already moving on. Ethan watched it all unfold from the Peninsula suite, feeling disconnected from everything. Maya noticed his mood and tried to cheer him up by performing an elaborate dance she'd choreographed herself. He applauded and smiled and pretended everything was fine. But that night, after she was asleep, he stood on the terrace and wondered if Marcus Brennan had been right about revenge digesting like poison. He'd won. Victoria's lawsuit was gone, her lies were exposed, her crimes were being punished. His reputation was intact, his business was secure, and his daughter was safe. So why did he feel like he'd lost something important? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed me. You took everything. I hope it was worth it." Ethan stared at the message for a long time, then typed a response. "I gave you a chance to walk away. You chose to run instead. This isn't on me." The response came quickly. "You're right. It's not on you. It's on both of us. We both made choices that led here. But I'm the one in custody and you're the one in a penthouse, so I guess we know who won." Another message followed before Ethan could respond. "For what it's worth, I did love you. That was real. I was just too stupid and shallow to see what mattered until it was too late. I hope Maya grows up better than I turned out. She deserves that." The messages stopped. Ethan waited, but nothing else came through. He looked out at Chicago glittering below and thought about all the ways their choices had created this moment. Victoria's choice to value money over love, his choice to confront her publicly instead of walking away, her choice to fight back with lies, his choice to dig into her finances looking for leverage. Two people who'd once cared about each other had turned into weapons aimed at mutual destruction. And somehow, Ethan had won that war while losing something he couldn't quite name. He deleted the messages, blocked the number, and went back inside where his daughter slept safely, surrounded by everything his grandfather's money could provide. It should have been enough. It would have to be enough. Because the alternative, admitting that revenge had cost him something he couldn't get back, was too complicated to face at midnight in a hotel suite while the woman he'd once loved sat in a federal holding cell waiting for arraignment. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new chances to figure out who he was becoming. But tonight, all he felt was hollow victory and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. The hollow feeling didn't go away with sleep. It was still there when Ethan woke up the next morning, still there when he made Maya breakfast, still there when he tried to pretend everything was normal while his daughter chattered about wanting to see the dinosaurs at the Field Museum. "Can we go today, Daddy? Please?" "Sure, sweetheart. Let me just make a few calls first." But the calls never happened because Oliver Pembroke showed up at the Peninsula Suite unannounced at 9 in the morning, looking unusually grave. "Mr. Cole, we need to talk. May I come in?" Ethan let him in, sent Maya to watch cartoons in the bedroom, and braced himself for whatever new disaster was unfolding. "Victoria Langford attempted suicide last night," Oliver said without preamble. "She's alive, in stable condition at Northwestern Memorial, but it was a serious attempt. Overdose of prescription medication. Her attorney called me an hour ago." The room tilted. Ethan sat down hard on the couch. "Is she going to be okay?" "Physically, yes. Mentally." Oliver shook his head. "She's on psychiatric hold. They're evaluating her, but given the circumstances, arrest, public humiliation, facing federal charges, she's considered high risk." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because her attorney asked me to. She wants to see you." "No, absolutely not. I told him that would be your response." "But Mr. Cole, there's something else. The prosecutor handling her case called my office. They're considering offering her a plea deal, reduced charges, lighter sentence, if she cooperates with a larger investigation into corporate fraud. Apparently several other executives at Meridian were involved in similar schemes, and Victoria might be able to provide evidence." "What does that have to do with me?" "Nothing directly. But the prosecutor wanted you to know that Victoria's cooperation could reduce her sentence significantly, 5 years instead of 15, and he wanted to know if you had any objection to that arrangement." Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out at Lake Michigan stretching gray and cold under an overcast sky. "Why would my objection matter?" "Because you're the one who provided the information that led to her arrest. The prosecutor views you as a concerned citizen who came forward about corporate crime. Your opinion carries weight." "I didn't come forward. I sent an anonymous tip, which we can confirm came from you if necessary. The point is, you have influence over how this case proceeds. If you tell the prosecutor you want maximum penalties, Victoria serves 15 years minimum. If you say you have no objection to leniency, she might get out in 5 with good behavior." Ethan pressed his forehead against the glass, feeling the cold seep into his skin. "What do you think I should do? That's not my decision to make. But I will say this. Holding on to anger and pursuing maximum punishment won't undo what she did to you. It won't make the past few weeks disappear. It will just be another choice you'll have to live with." After Oliver left, Ethan sat on the couch and stared at nothing while Maya's cartoon played in the background. He thought about Victoria in a hospital room, thought about her desperate enough to swallow pills, thought about her sitting in a cell for 15 years versus 5. His phone rang. Marcus Brennan. "I heard about Victoria," Marcus said. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this." "There's no supposed to. You feel however you feel. Part of me thinks she deserves everything that's happening, but another part remembers that 3 weeks ago I loved her, or thought I did, and now she's in a hospital because her entire life collapsed, and I helped make that happen." "Did you make her embezzle millions of dollars?" "No." "Did you make her file a fraudulent lawsuit against you?" "No." "Did you make her try to destroy your reputation in the media?" "No, but I—" "Then you didn't make this happen, Ethan. You responded to attacks. You defended yourself. The fact that her own crimes came to light during that process isn't your fault. So why do I feel guilty?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because you're a decent person. Because despite everything she did, you still have empathy. That's not weakness, that's humanity. The question isn't whether you should feel guilty. Feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are. The question is what you're going to do with those feelings." After the call, Ethan made a decision. He texted Oliver. Tell the prosecutor I have no objection to leniency if Victoria cooperates. I don't want maximum penalties. The response came quickly. Understood. I'll convey that. Then Ethan did something he'd been avoiding for weeks. He called the Chicago Business Foundation and asked to speak with someone about making a donation. The conversation that followed changed everything. 3 days later, Ethan stood in front of a rundown community center on the south side, looking at a building that reminded him painfully of the apartment he'd been evicted from. Peeling paint, cracked windows, a sign that hung crooked announcing after-school programs and job training. Beside him, a woman named Angela Rodriguez smiled despite the building's condition. She ran the center with a staff of 3 and a budget that barely covered utilities. We serve about 200 families, she explained as they walked inside. Single parents mostly, people working 2 or 3 jobs and still barely making rent. We provide childcare, tutoring, job placement assistance, whatever we can manage with what we've got. The interior was clean but worn. Donated furniture, outdated computers, walls that needed painting. But the space was full of life. Kids doing homework at folding tables, adults attending a resume workshop, a small kitchen where volunteers prepared meals. This is what I want to fund, Ethan said. Expansion, renovation, better resources. Whatever you need. Angela stopped walking and turned to face him. Mr. Cole, we're talking about significant investment for a center that serves a population most donors ignore. Why? Because 3 weeks ago, my daughter and I were homeless. We slept on a bench outside a laundromat because I couldn't afford rent. The only difference between me and the people you serve is that I got lucky with an inheritance I didn't know existed. That luck could have gone to anyone. It happened to go to me. So I'm going to use it for something that actually matters. Angela's eyes filled with tears. How much are you thinking? How much do you need? They spent the next 2 hours going through budgets and wish lists. By the time Ethan left, he'd committed $5 million to renovating the center, expanding programs, and establishing an endowment for ongoing operations. It was the first thing that had felt right since the inheritance. That evening, Ethan took Maya to dinner at a regular restaurant. Not expensive, not fancy, just a family place with good burgers and milkshakes. She got chocolate sauce on her face and talked non-stop about a new friend she'd made at the hotel's kids club. Her name is Sophie, and she's from California, and she has a dog named Pickles. Can we get a dog, Daddy? Maybe. We'd need a real home first, not a hotel. When are we getting a real home? It was a good question. They'd been living at the peninsula for almost 3 weeks, and while it was comfortable, it wasn't sustainable. Maya needed stability, routine, a place that felt permanent. Soon, Ethan promised, I'll start looking. But looking for homes meant making decisions about who they were now, what kind of life they wanted to build. And Ethan still wasn't sure he knew the answer. His phone buzzed during dessert, a text from Oliver. Victoria took the plea deal. 5 years, eligible for parole in 3 with good behavior. She wanted me to tell you thank you. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then put his phone away without responding. Daddy, you okay? Maya asked through a mouthful of ice cream. Yeah, baby, I'm okay. The next morning, Ethan received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to the peninsula by messenger. The return address was Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity won over caution, and he opened the envelope to find 3 pages covered in Victoria's familiar handwriting. Ethan, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding or anything from you. But my therapist here says I need to take accountability for my actions, so I'm writing this whether you read it or not. You were right about everything. I did value money over love. I did measure your worth by your bank account. I did abandon you when life got hard because I was too shallow and self-absorbed to see what actually mattered. I spent 3 years climbing a corporate ladder that led nowhere except to federal prison. I stole money to maintain a lifestyle I thought would make me important, make me valuable, make me worth something. But all it did was make me a criminal and a liar. When I met you, you were still grieving Sarah. You were struggling, but you were present. Present for Maya, present in your relationships, present in your life in a way I never learned how to be. I think that scared me. Because being present means feeling things, and I'd spent my whole life avoiding feelings by chasing the next promotion, the next salary increase, the next external validation. You asked me once why I left you for Preston. The truth is, I didn't leave you for him. I left you because staying meant confronting who I was becoming, and I couldn't handle that. Preston was just an excuse, a way to blame the ending on something other than my own character failures. I'm not writing this to make you feel sorry for me. I made my choices, and I deserve the consequences. I'm writing because you deserve to know that none of what happened was your fault. You were a good partner. You were a good father. You were trying your best in an impossible situation, and I punished you for that because it was easier than examining my own values. The lawsuit, the media campaign, all of it. That was me being too proud to admit I'd made a mistake. I convinced myself you were the villain because accepting that I was the villain was too painful. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I'm not sure I'd forgive me if our positions were reversed, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend my time in prison trying to become someone better than the person who hurt you. Please tell Maya I'm sorry for not being the person she deserved. She's lucky to have you. Victoria Ethan read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer. He didn't respond, didn't send a message back, didn't try to see her before she was transferred to federal custody. But he stopped feeling hollow about what had happened. Victoria's choices were hers. His choices were his. They'd both made mistakes, both caused harm, both had to live with the consequences. And that was enough of an ending. 2 weeks later, Ethan closed on a house. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a comfortable 4-bedroom in Lincoln Park with a backyard where Maya could play and a neighborhood with good schools. It felt like a home in a way the peninsula never had. The day they moved in, Marcus Brennan stopped by with a housewarming gift, a bottle of expensive scotch, and a framed photo of Ethan's grandfather. Jonathan asked me to hold on to this, Marcus explained. Said if I ever met you, I should give it to you. It's from the day he bought his first building in London. Wanted you to remember where the money came from, not luck, but work. One building at a time. The photo showed a younger Jonathan Cole standing in front of a shabby building, grinning despite the peeling paint and broken windows. He looked proud and terrified and determined. He looked like Ethan had felt sleeping on that laundromat bench. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. He'd be proud of what you're doing with the foundation work. Angela called me. She's over the moon about the community center funding. Said you're changing lives. I'm just trying to help people who are where I was. That's exactly what Jonathan did. He never forgot being poor, never forgot what it felt like to be desperate, used his success to make sure other people didn't have to suffer the way he had. After Marcus left, Ethan hung the photo in his office, a small room overlooking the backyard where he planned to actually learn how to manage his inherited empire instead of just letting others do it for him. Maya ran in with her new rabbit, the old one retired to a place of honor on her bookshelf. Daddy, can Sophie come over to play? Her mom said yes if you say yes. Sure, sweetheart. We'll set up a play date. What's that picture? That's your great-grandfather, the man who owned all the buildings before I did. Maya studied it seriously. He looks happy. I think he was. He worked really hard and it paid off. Are you happy, Daddy? The question caught him off guard. Ethan looked at his daughter, healthy, safe, smiling, holding a stuffed rabbit in a house that was actually theirs, and realized he didn't have a simple answer. Was he happy? He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He had security, influence, opportunities. He'd defeated someone who'd tried to destroy him, had come out of a war victorious. But he had also discovered that revenge tasted like ash, that winning didn't always feel like winning, that having everything material while carrying the weight of complicated choices was its own kind of poverty. I'm getting there, he told Maya honestly. I think I'm figuring out how to be happy. She seemed satisfied with that and ran off to arrange her room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and his grandfather's photo. Over the next 3 months, Ethan threw himself into the foundation work. He funded 3 more community centers, established scholarship programs for kids from struggling families, and started a job training initiative that helped single parents develop marketable skills. He attended board meetings and learned about property management and took business courses at night to understand the empire he'd inherited. He made mistakes, asked stupid questions, and slowly began to grasp how wealth could be used for something beyond just accumulating more wealth. He took Maya to her new school every morning and picked her up every afternoon. They had dinner together every night, played board games on weekends, went to museums and parks, and all the places they'd never been able to afford before. Life developed a rhythm that felt sustainable, purposeful, real. One evening in late summer, Ethan received a package at his office. No return address, just a postmark from the Federal Correctional Facility where Victoria was serving her sentence. Inside was a book, a novel about redemption and second chances, with a bookmark on a specific page. A passage was highlighted in yellow. We are not the worst thing we've ever done. We are also not absolved of it. We exist in the space between our mistakes and our growth, and that space is where we find out who we actually are. Tucked into the book was a note card with 2 words in Victoria's handwriting, "Thank you." Ethan put the book on his shelf next to his grandfather's photo and didn't write back. But he understood the message. Victoria was trying to become someone better, so was he. Their paths had diverged violently and painfully, but they were both walking forward. That was enough. 6 months after the inheritance, Ethan attended another Chicago Business Foundation gala. This time he brought Maya, who wore a fancy dress she'd picked out herself and complained that the shoes were too tight. "Why do fancy shoes always hurt?" she asked in the car. "Because fancy people make bad decisions about comfort," Ethan replied, making her giggle. The gala was different this time. People knew who he was now, not as Victoria Langford's ex-boyfriend, not as the subject of scandal, but as the philanthropist who was funding programs that actually helped people. They approached him with genuine respect, asked about the foundation's work, wanted to collaborate on projects. Marcus Brennan found him during cocktail hour. "You've done well, Ethan. Jonathan would be incredibly proud." "I'm just trying to do what feels right. That's all any of us can do." Marcus gestured to the crowd. "You know, half these people are here because it looks good, not because they actually care. But you're here because you remember what it's like to need help. That authenticity matters. Don't lose it when the money starts feeling normal." "I won't. Maya won't let me." As if summoned, Maya appeared with chocolate on her face from the dessert table. "Daddy, there's a whole fountain of chocolate. A fountain. Can we get one at home?" "Absolutely not." "But we're rich. Being rich doesn't mean we need a chocolate fountain." "Then what's the point of being rich?" Ethan crouched down to her level, wiping chocolate from her chin. "The point is having enough. Enough food, enough safety, enough comfort, so we can focus on things that actually matter, like helping other people have enough too." Maya considered this. "So we're rich so we can make other people less poor?" "Something like that." "That's pretty cool, I guess. Can I still get a dog, though?" "We'll talk about it." Later that evening, during the speeches and presentations, the foundation president recognized Ethan's contributions. He stood while people applauded, feeling exposed and uncomfortable, but also strangely proud. "Mr. Cole's generosity has transformed our ability to serve families in crisis," she said. "His commitment to this work comes from personal experience and genuine compassion. We're honored to have him as a partner in our mission." Maya clapped the loudest, standing on her chair until Ethan gently pulled her down. After the gala, driving home through Chicago's familiar streets, Maya fell asleep in the back seat, clutching the small stuffed bear someone had given her. Ethan looked at her in the rearview mirror and thought about how far they'd come from that bench outside the laundromat. 3 weeks from homeless to billionaire. 3 months from bitter and angry to purposeful and engaged. 6 months from believing he'd lost everything to understanding he'd actually found something more valuable than he'd lost. Not happiness exactly. That was too simple a word for the complicated mix of guilt and purpose and grief and hope he carried. But something like peace. Something like meaning. The wealth hadn't changed who he was at his core. He was still the father who'd counted quarters for groceries, still the man who'd prioritized his daughter over pride, still the person who knew what desperation tasted like. But the wealth had given him choices. And the choices he'd made. To fund community programs, to help people who were struggling, to use his resources for something beyond himself. Those choices were shaping who he was becoming. Victoria had been wrong about him being small, but she'd been right that he'd accepted his situation rather than fighting harder. The difference was that acceptance hadn't been surrender, it had been survival. And survival, it turned out, was its own kind of strength. When they got home, Ethan carried Maya inside and tucked her into bed without waking her. He stood in her doorway watching her sleep, this small person who'd been through too much, who'd lost her mother and lived in poverty and weathered every storm beside him without losing her ability to smile. She was the reason for everything. The reason he'd kept going when giving up would have been easier. The The reason he couldn't become someone consumed by revenge. The reason he had to be better than his worst impulses. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Angela at the community center. Just wanted you to know we placed 3 more single parents in full-time jobs this week. One of them cried when she got the offer. She'd been living in her car with 2 kids. She has an apartment now. You made that happen. He read the message twice, then typed a response. She made it happen. We just gave her a chance. But as he sent it, he knew that wasn't quite true. Chances mattered. Resources mattered. Having someone believe in you when you'd stopped believing in yourself mattered. He'd gotten that chance through an inheritance he hadn't earned. Now he was trying to create chances for people who deserved them just as much. That night, Ethan sat in his office and opened his laptop to the Foundation's webpage. There was a form for people to apply for assistance, rent help, job training, childcare support, whatever they needed to stay afloat while building something better. He read through the applications that had come in that week. A woman who'd escaped an abusive relationship and needed first month's rent. A man who'd lost his job after a car accident and couldn't afford his daughter's medication. A family living in a shelter, trying to save enough for a deposit on an apartment. Each application was a story of people trying to survive, trying to keep going, trying to protect their families despite impossible circumstances. Each application was a version of himself 3 months ago. Ethan approved every single one, transferring funds that would have seemed like unimaginable wealth to him when he'd been counting quarters but were pocket change now. The math was obscene. The difference between poverty and stability was often just a few $1,000s, but that gap might as well have been a chasm for people without resources to cross it. He could cross it for them. Not fix everything, not solve poverty, not make the world fair. But he could build bridges for specific people at specific moments when bridges meant the difference between surviving and drowning. It wasn't enough to erase his complicated feelings about Victoria, about the war they'd fought, about the choices he'd made in anger. But it was something. It was using the inheritance for what his grandfather had apparently intended, helping people who reminded him where he'd come from. Around midnight, Ethan closed his laptop and walked through his quiet house. Maya's room, where she slept surrounded by stuffed animals and books. The kitchen, where they'd made breakfast together that morning. The backyard, visible through windows, where she'd played with Sophie the previous weekend. This was what wealth had bought him. Not the house itself, though it was nice. Not the security, though that mattered. But the ability to be present for his daughter, to focus on being a good father instead of desperately scrambling for survival. And if he could have that, why couldn't others? That question became the Foundation's new mission statement, crafted over the following weeks with Angela's help. If one person deserves stability, everyone does. If one child deserves a safe home, every child does. We can't help everyone, but we can help someone, and someone is worth everything. The programs expanded. More community centers, more job training, more assistance for families in crisis. Ethan hired staff, established partnerships, built infrastructure for sustainable impact. The work consumed him in a good way, filling the hollow spaces that revenge had left behind. Every family housed, every job secured, every child who got to eat dinner without wondering if there'd be breakfast. These weren't abstracts, they were victories. Small victories, maybe, in a world full of injustice and struggle. But they mattered to the people receiving help. And they mattered to Ethan, who understood exactly what those victories felt like. A year after the inheritance, Ethan stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a renovated community center on the west side. Maya stood beside him, holding oversized scissors, grinning for the cameras. On behalf of the Cole Family Foundation, Ethan said to the crowd of families and supporters, "We're honored to open this facility. This building represents a commitment to the idea that everyone deserves a chance to build a better life. My daughter and I know what it's like to need that chance. We're grateful to be able to provide it for others." Maya cut the ribbon with theatrical flair and the crowd cheered. Kids ran into the new playground equipment while parents toured the job training facilities and childcare rooms. Angela pulled Ethan aside. "You know what the best part of all this is?" "What's that?" "You're not doing it to make yourself feel better about what happened with Victoria. You're doing it because you genuinely care. That's rare among donors. Most people are trying to buy their way to feeling like good people. You're just trying to help." "I'm trying to be the person my daughter thinks I am." "That's the same thing." Later, driving Maya home, she asked a question that had clearly been building for a while. "Daddy, what happened to Victoria? Ethan had been dreading this conversation, but knew it was inevitable. She's in prison, sweetheart. She made some bad choices and broke the law. Is that because of us? Because we got rich? No, baby. It's because she chose to steal money from her company. That's not about us. That's about her choices. Maya was quiet for a moment. Do you still love her? The question hit harder than Ethan expected. Did he still love Victoria? After everything, the betrayal, the war, the arrests, the year of distance, and growth? I don't think so, he said honestly. I think I loved who I thought she was. But the real her and the person I imagined weren't the same. So no, I don't love her. But I don't hate her either. I hope she figures out how to be better. That's very mature of you, Daddy, he laughed. Where'd you learn that word? Sophie's mom says it when Sophie stops being bratty. She says, how mature? Well, I'm glad I'm being mature. Me too. It's better than being sad all the time like you were before. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds. That evening, after Maya was in bed, Ethan received an email from Oliver Pembroke. The subject line read Meridian Settlement. The body was brief. Meridian Capital has settled its civil suit against Victoria Langford for full restitution plus damages. They've also offered to extend their lease with your property for another 20 years at agreed-upon terms with no reduction. Thought you'd want to know. So it was completely over. Victoria had paid back what she'd stolen, Meridian was satisfied, the legal machinery had ground to its conclusion. Ethan closed the email without responding. There was nothing left to say. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the letter Victoria had written from the hospital over a year ago. Read it one more time, then filed it away in a folder marked The Past, that he kept for things he didn't want to forget but didn't need to revisit. Victoria was part of his history now, a chapter that had shaped him but didn't define him. A painful lesson about love and money and the importance of knowing someone's character before trusting them with your heart, but also a lesson about his own capacity for anger, for pettiness, for letting hurt turn into harm. He'd won their war, but victory had taught him that some battles weren't worth fighting, even when you had every right to fight them. 2 years after the inheritance, Maya's 8th birthday party filled their backyard with chaos and laughter. Sophie was there, plus a dozen other kids from school, running around with cake and presents while parents chatted and supervised. Marcus Brennan showed up with an enormous stuffed elephant that barely fit through the door. You're spoiling her, Ethan said. That's what honorary grandfathers do. How's the foundation work? Growing faster than I expected. We're opening 2 more centers this year, and we've partnered with 5 other cities to replicate the model. Jonathan would be so damn proud. You've taken his money and made it matter. I'm trying. Later, after the guests had left and Maya had crashed on the couch in a sugar-induced stupor, Ethan cleaned up the backyard while the sun set over Chicago. He thought about how different this birthday was from her 6th, when he'd scraped together enough money for a cupcake and a single small toy. She'd been happy then, too, because she'd had him, and at that age, that was enough. The money had made life easier, safer, more comfortable. But it hadn't made Maya love him more. It hadn't made their relationship stronger. Those things had always been there, surviving poverty, because they were built on something money couldn't buy. That was the real lesson he'd learned from the inheritance. Wealth was a tool, nothing more. It could build or destroy, help or harm, elevate or corrupt. What mattered was what you chose to do with it. Victoria had chosen to use money to define her worth, to measure success, to determine who deserved her time and attention. That choice had destroyed her. Ethan had chosen differently. Not perfectly. He'd made mistakes, let anger guide choices he regretted, learned lessons the hard way. But ultimately, he'd chosen to use his resources to help people who were where he'd been. And that choice, more than the inheritance itself, was what made him feel wealthy in ways that actually mattered. His phone rang. An unknown number, which he normally didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Cole? This is Jennifer Martinez. I don't know if you remember me, but we met briefly at the community center opening last year. I remember. How can I help you? I just wanted to call and say thank you. The job training program you funded, I went through it, and I just got hired as an office manager at a law firm. It's the first real job I've had in 3 years. My kids and I have an apartment now. We're not in the shelter anymore, and it's because of what you built. Ethan's throat tightened. That's wonderful, Jennifer. I'm so happy for you. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing matters. You changed my life. You probably don't remember me specifically, but I'll never forget what your foundation did for us." After the call ended, Ethan stood in his backyard and let himself cry. Not from sadness, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that he'd found what he'd been searching for since the inheritance. Purpose. Meaning. A reason to have wealth beyond just having it. Victoria had been wrong about him being small. His life had never been small. It had been focused on what mattered. Being a father, taking care of his daughter, surviving with dignity even when survival was hard. The inheritance hadn't made him bigger. It had just given him a bigger platform to do what he'd always done. Protect the people who needed protecting. Help the people who needed help. Be present for what actually mattered. Maya appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy, sweetheart." "That's weird. Happy people smile." Sometimes happy is so big it comes out as tears. She accepted this wisdom and came to stand beside him, leaning against his side. "This was the best birthday ever." "I'm glad. Do you think Mom would have liked the party?" The question surprised him. Maya didn't talk about Sarah often, had been so young when she died that memories were more impressions than specifics. "She would have loved it," Ethan said. "She would have been so proud of who you're becoming." "Do you miss her?" "Every day. But having you makes the missing easier." Maya hugged him tightly. "I'm glad we got rich, Daddy. Not because of the stuff, but because you're not so worried anymore. You smile more now." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his office and opened a new document on his computer. He'd been thinking about writing down his story, not for publication, not for attention, but for Maya to read someday when she was older and could understand everything that had happened. He titled it, "What We Lost and What We Found," and began to write. 3 years ago, your mother died, and I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. 2 years ago, we were homeless, and I thought I'd failed you completely. 18 months ago, I inherited a fortune, and I thought that would solve everything. I was wrong about all of it. What I actually lost was the illusion that wealth equals worth. What I actually failed at was understanding that surviving poverty with dignity was its own success. What I actually found was that money is just a tool, and the only thing that matters is what you build with it. I built a war with someone I thought I loved, and that war taught me that revenge is poison. I built programs to help people, and that taught me that giving is the only use of wealth that actually feeds the soul. I built a life with you at the center of it, and that taught me that I'd always been rich in the only way that matters. I had someone to love who loved me back. You're 8 now, too young to understand most of this. Someday you'll read it, and maybe it'll make sense. Maybe you'll judge some of my choices. Maybe you'll understand why I made them. But I want you to know that everything I did, good and bad, right and wrong, was trying to be someone you could be proud of. Someone who used his second chance to build something worth having. I hope I succeeded. I hope when you're older, you'll look at the Foundation's work and the lives we changed and understand that true wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give. It's who you help. It's whether you remember where you came from and use whatever resources you have to pull others up. Your great-grandfather built an empire from nothing. Your mother gave me you. Victoria taught me what love isn't. The inheritance gave me choices. But you, Maya, you're the reason any of it matters. You're why I kept going when going seemed impossible. You're why I chose help over harm. You're why I'm still here, still trying, still building. I love you more than all the money in all the world. And that's the only wealth that will ever really count. Ethan saved the document and closed his laptop. He walked through his quiet house one more time, checking locks, turning off lights, making sure everything was secure. In Maya's room, she slept peacefully, surrounded by birthday presents and the remnants of celebration. Her old rabbit sat on the shelf beside her new ones, a reminder of where they'd been. Ethan stood in her doorway and made a promise to the sleeping child who'd survived everything alongside him. "I'll keep building something worth inheriting," he whispered. "Not money, though you'll have that too, but values, purpose, the understanding that what we have is less important than what we do with it." Maya didn't stir, lost in whatever dreams 8-year-olds have. And Ethan turned away, walked to his own room, and fell asleep knowing that tomorrow he'd wake up and keep building. Keep helping. Keep choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. The inheritance had given him resources. Maya had given him purpose. The war with Victoria had given him wisdom. And somewhere in the combination of all three, he'd found something that looked a lot like redemption. Not for what he'd done wrong, those mistakes were his to carry, but for the chance to become someone better than his worst moments, someone defined by his choices going forward rather than his pain looking back. The story didn't have a perfect ending because life doesn't work that way. Victoria was still in prison, still paying for her crimes. Ethan still carried guilt about the role he'd played in her downfall. The foundation helped people but couldn't help everyone. Money solved some problems but created others. But in the messy, complicated, imperfect reality of it all, Ethan had found peace, had found purpose, had found a way to honor his grandfather's legacy, his wife's memory, and his daughter's faith in him. And that was enough. That was wealth. That was everything.